Chapter 11:19. When Bing Tang saw how cautious Pang Xiao was, she could only nod helplessly. When Pang Xiao walked away, she turned to Qin Yining and said, "Wang Fei, don't be angry at Wang Yi. At that time, when you gave birth to the two young masters, you suffered too much, and it really frightened the prince. He is a man, but in order to not let you suffer, he even thought of such a method. It is enough to show his sincerity to you." Seeing that Qin Yining only lowered her head slightly and refused to speak, Bing Tang continued to speak. "This servant was afraid that you would blame yourself if you knew, so I didn't want to tell you. Wang Yi only cared about you. We can't ruin his heart. Besides, this servant was confident that the medicine wouldn't harm Wang Ye's foundation. I just thought that it would be a good thing if you didn't get pregnant these past few years. First, the situation in the imperial court is unstable. You've been homeless for too long, so it's not suitable for you to have a child. Second, I wanted to help you nurse your body back to health. I understand that you have good intentions." Qin Yining sighed softly. "We've been together since a long time ago. Although I had no choice but to take you in as a servant, I've always treated you like a sister in my heart. I naturally trust you." When Bing Tang thought of the past, her heart was filled with emotions. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and a layer of mist covered her large eyes. "Wang Fei, I know your difficulties, and I know that you're a kind person. I also know that you're in a difficult position. No one knows about the hardships you've suffered for Wang Yi. I've been by your side all day, so how could I not know? Fortunately, Wang Yi has always treated you the same. His feelings for you have never diminished because of prosperity, and they haven't changed because of the passage of time. When Wang Yi asked me about this medicine, I dared to give it to him because I know that Wang Yi cares about you and your feelings. Even if Wang Yi doesn't care about me, he will forgive me for your sake." Qin Yining was moved by Bing Tang's sincere words. He held her hand and said, "I understand. I can also understand what Wang Yi and you were thinking at that time. I can't put my feelings into words. I was also very worried. If he couldn't have any more children in the future, it would all be my fault. I'm not doubting his feelings for me. Look at my father. For the sake of his children, he's..." Bing Tang nodded. She had an apple-shaped face and a petite figure. She looked like she was only 14 or 15 years old. However, because she had studied medicine for many years and had seen many kinds of diseases, she had a more thorough understanding of people's birth, aging, illness, and death. She also had a deeper understanding of the world. "Wang Fei, the most sincere thing in this world is love, but the most fragile thing is also love. Wang Yi is really good to you, but no one can guarantee that there won't be any changes in the future. I'm not saying this because I want you to be on guard against anything. After all, the feelings in this world are so unpredictable. I just want to say that it's not bad for you to have these worries, but you really don't need to worry too much about them." Qin Yining felt that she had entered a wrong place. She couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. She couldn't even control her emotions. The present situation was not the time for her to let her imagination run wild. It was not the right time for her to think about these things. "I understand what you're saying. It's just that emotions are not so easy to control. Thinking about it, I really shouldn't be like this. Wang Yi is already very good to me. Who can say for sure what will happen in the future? It's not necessarily going to develop the way I think it will. It's too early to start worrying about the future." Bing Tang smiled and nodded. Seeing that Qin Yining's brows were still furrowed in worry, she couldn't help but say, "Wang Fei, I can't see the pregnancy pulse from your pulse, but I feel that you are the same as when you were pregnant with Goob. You are very emotional, and your mind has become more sensitive and soft. Qin Yining's slender and white hand gently stroked her stomach. She smiled, for this kind of thing, even if it can't be seen from the pulse, as a mother, my feelings are very accurate. I also feel that I might really be pregnant. I didn't say it at the beginning because I didn't want to be happy for nothing. Bing Tang smiled and said, "It's not important. Wang Fei, don't worry. I'll work hard to adjust it for you. You should listen to me. Eat what I tell you to eat and sleep as long as I tell you to sleep. I guarantee that when you really want to give birth in the future, nothing will go wrong." Qin Yining's mood suddenly brightened and he nodded repeatedly. Pang Xiao was very uneasy. When she came back at night, she saw that Qin Yining was no different from usual. Bing Tang also nodded to her to indicate that everything was fine. Only then did she relax. After a simple dinner, Qin Yining helped Pang Xiao take off her clothes. "Has there been any battle report from the court? How is the battle situation at North Marquis side?" Pang Xiao sat on the edge of the bed wearing a snowy white undergarment. Qin Yining threw the outer robe in his hands onto the screen and pulled her into the warm blankets that had been warmed by the hot water mattress. He gave a long sigh of relief. The battle report hasn't arrived yet. Maybe it's because the weather is cold and our people's journey has been delayed. But the situation ahead definitely won't be good. During this period of time, the battle between Dezhou and the Titan had been declining. Although Dezhou had just been established and should be at the peak of its strength, the court did not have enough money. Furthermore, the Titan seemed to have realized that Dezhou did not have enough money to fight a protracted war. Instead, they avoided the front line and purposely stalled for time with Dezhou. No matter how capable Ji Ziyu was, he would not be able to lead soldiers who were full of resentment because they did not have enough to eat. After a few battles, Huichuan County had already been lost. They had retreated a few hundred li and were very close to the capital. If there was no improvement, the Titan might directly attack the capital. Wouldn't that be dangerous? The two of them thought about the worrisome battle situation and their hearts became heavy. After a good night's sleep, the latest battle report was delivered to them the next morning. When Pang Xiao saw it, she could not even eat breakfast. The situation is not good. Alan and Gao Wenliang have already led the Tiger Army and retreated to the last city outside the capital. What? Qin Yining turned pale with fright and dropped her chopsticks. The Titan are about to attack the capital. Pang Xiao nodded with a serious expression. She put down the battle report and opened the secret report. The report clearly stated the situation in the capital today, the attitude of the various parties, and the public opinion of the people. Pang Xiao glanced at it and passed it to Qin Yining. "Sister Yi, take a look." Qin Yining picked up the chopsticks and passed them to Bing Tang to wash. Then, she turned around and took the secret report that Pang Xiao denied. When she read it, she was so angry that she laughed. It's really interesting. The self-indulgent ruler spent all his money. He can't take out money to buy food for the disaster victims, nor can he take out money to feed the army. Instead, he's blaming you. It was clearly written in the secret report, His Highness sent disaster relief and purchased the world's grain and fodder. Although many rich families and grain merchants were located in the north, they traveled tens of thousands of li to deliver grain and fodder to His Highness for disaster relief. They were not willing to sell to the imperial court to feed the Tiger Army and resist the Tartars. Those rich and merchants care about profits the most. They are not stupid. Of course, they will choose to sell the same food at a reasonable price. The emperor only said how much money he would give, but what he did was no different from plundering. He either forced the price down or wrote an IOU. He did not give money to the people who sold the food, and he often owed money. It was no different from asking people to give it to him for free. Of course, those people will sell the food to the party who can get the money. Qin Yining returned the secret report to Pang Xiao and said with a frown, "Once this news spreads, I'm afraid that the ministers in the imperial court will also resent us." Along the way, you painstakingly raised the food and dealt with those people. Gradually, you opened up the situation and used the food you bought to save so many people. But now that they are talking about it, you have become a sinner. Alright, there's no need to be angry over this. Pang Xiao smiled brightly. Anyway, I have a clear conscience. Moreover, I feel very comfortable that the money was used on the people. His cheerful attitude made Qin Yining laugh. God has given you the best reward for what you have done. You have gained the love and trust of the people and your subordinates. If Li Qitian knew about this, he would probably flip the table in anger. He did not want you to regain control of the Tiger Army, but you unexpectedly won the hearts of the people. Gao Wenliang's ability is not as good as yours, and the war is getting more and more tense. Seeing that the Titan is about to break through the last city, Li Qitian will probably be angry and helpless. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. He knew Li Qitian's character too well. At this time, he was afraid that his intestines would turn green with regret. But he had made the decision himself. No one had influenced his thinking, so he could not blame anyone. The relief in the old capital was carried out in an orderly manner. While Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were busy feeding and resettling the people, the imperial court was in chaos. In the imperial court, Li Qitian sat upright in the throne room. The court officials were quarreling over the war. Some people agreed to remove Gao Wenliang and transfer Pang Xiao back to help Jiziyu. Some people tried to figure out the intentions of the emperor, saying that Pang Xiao regained control of the military power as a scourge. It was as if Pang Xiao would rebel as soon as he returned. Li Qitian felt a headache coming on. The situation these days was too anxious. He had not slept well for 2 days. When he came to the imperial court, it was noisy. When he returned to the imperial harem, the women in the imperial harem were even more anxious and forced smiles, as if the Titan were about to attack the imperial palace. The Empress Dowager even took his hand and asked him to send the women out of the palace for secret protection. Li Qitian was flustered and angry. As the emperor, he did not think of running away. The Empress Dowager and the imperial concubines were a group of freeloaders. They could not help him and instead made trouble for him. When they encountered trouble, the first thing they wanted to do was to run away. Li Qitian felt that he did not even have the strength to quarrel now. In the future, he would not settle the score with the Titan in the palace. He just ordered that the Titan would not be able to attack the imperial palace. Even if they did, the imperial family would rather die than let anyone live without purpose. When the Empress Dowager and Li Helan heard this, they hugged each other and cried bitterly. Li Qitian was so annoyed that his head hurt. Now the court officials were still quarreling and could not come up with any useful suggestions. He really could not bear it and scolded in a deep voice, "Shut up, all of you. I raised you so that you could speak freely and contribute to the country in times of crisis. How are you? What are you thinking now?" The emperor was angry, and the noisy people had to stop. Chapter 11:20. Your Majesty is wise. The officials bowed respectfully and did not dare to refute. With the current situation in the court, there was no other feasible solution other than ordering the troops to go to the capital to provide reinforcements. However, the mountain was high and the road was long, so it was inevitable that the journey would be delayed for a period of time. During this period of time, it was unknown whether Jiziyu and Gao Wenliang could withstand the iron hooves of the Titan army. Your Majesty. At this time, another old official stood up and said loudly, "This official requests Your Majesty's permission to send Prince Zhongshuan back to the capital to take over as the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army. Prince Zhongshuan is brave and good at fighting." With Duke Dinggua's cooperation, they will definitely be able to break the deadlock of the Titan. Once someone dared to stand up and make a suggestion, there were immediately people who came forward to agree. Li Qitian's brows were tightly knitted, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. They were saying this again and asking him to send Pang Shao back. Could it be that he would not be able to defend his country after he started Pang Shao? Could it be that he was the only brave and good at fighting? He had many generals under his command, but all of them added together were not as good as Pang Zhishi. Li Qitian was silent. Immediately, someone who was good at guessing and discussing stood up to refute. Prince Zhongshuan had a record of repeatedly disobeying imperial edicts in his early years. Your Majesty was merciful and did not pursue this matter, but Prince Zhongshuan became more and more severe. Now in the south, he used the name of disaster relief to search for provisions everywhere. He took this opportunity to occupy the supply route, causing the court to have no provisions to support the front lines. His intentions should be punished. This official agrees. This official believes that Prince Zhongshuan has the ambition of a wolf and has ulterior motives. If he sends people back at this time, it is completely inviting a wolf into the house. It is very likely that De Zhou's troops will be attacked from both sides. As soon as this was said, a general who admired Pang Shao stepped forward and refuted in a loud voice, "You only know how to hide behind others. Have you ever fought in a war? Have you seen the cruelty of the battlefield? If I really asked you to go to the battlefield, I'm afraid you'd be scared to the point of peeing your pants, coward. What qualifications do you have to slander Prince Zhongshuan?" Prince Zhongshuan had made great contributions to the establishment of De Zhou. He was magnanimous and honest, loyal and devoted to your Majesty. It was all because of you villains who instigated him behind his back, instigated him several times, and spread rumors to create trouble. Slandering Prince Zhongshuan and sowing discord between your Majesty and his subjects, what are your intentions? The civil official was so angry that his beard trembled. How can you be so presumptuous in the throne room? Your Majesty is wise and has his own decisions. How can he be swayed by a few words from others? Aren't you belittling your Majesty with your words? Li Qitian's brows were tightly knitted as he listened to his subordinates quarreling over Pang Shao. His heart was filled with irritation. He wished he could send these troublemakers out and behead them. He didn't want Pang Shao to come into contact with the Tiger Army and didn't want him to regain military power. He was supposed to be providing disaster relief, but he actually made such a big fuss. He was clearly deliberately going against him. He was purchasing large quantities of grain from the outside, so that the troops resisting the Tartars did not have any grain to eat. Now he created this kind of power and influence, so that the common people of the groom's side were praising him non-stop. Li Qitian was so angry that he was about to go crazy. "Shut up!" Li Qitian couldn't bear it any longer and roared loudly. The throne room returned to silence again. Everyone lowered their heads cautiously and said in unison, "Your Majesty, please calm down. Calm down, calm down." Li Qitian stood up and walked around with his hands behind his back. "The Titan are about to arrive. Do you all only know how to quarrel in the imperial court? If the Titan really enters the capital, it's not only me who will suffer, but also your families and all the people in the capital. Once the country is destroyed, the Titan's iron hooves will step over the capital and go straight to the central plains. Then all the people will be shrouded in the shadow of the iron hooves. They will be tortured, killed, and enslaved." Li Qitian said righteously and sternly, "I will never allow such a thing to happen. I won't take half a step back. I will stay in the capital and be the last line of defense for De Zhou. Your Majesty is benevolent." The officials kowtowed one after another. Some were even moved to tears. Li Qitian's tone softened slightly. "As for Prince Zhongshuan, the disaster in the south is serious. The disaster relief is also to help me quell the chaos in the south. Prince Zhongshuan is very capable. No matter in the south or the north, he has an irreplaceable role. Yes. The officials saluted. How could they not understand? Li Qitian obviously didn't want the Pang Shao to have military power. Some old officials secretly shook their heads and sighed. Your Majesty doesn't know where his confidence comes from. The Titan is now supported by Lu Heng's financial resources. In addition, Si Qin and Lu Heng are both good at scheming. Ji Ziyu is leading 100,000 soldiers and horses. It's already not easy for him to hold on under the condition of lacking provisions. What's more, he has Gao Wenliang by his side who orders him around. At this time, they are retreating step by step and are about to retreat to the capital. However, Your Majesty is still blindly confident that he is also an emperor and can defend the capital. Some old officials were even on the verge of tears. Under this turbulent situation, the common people's lives will only be more difficult in the future. After the court meeting, Li Qitian's decree was drafted by the cabinet. After Li Qitian looked through it, he distributed it to all parts of the country. In less than half a month, the troops from all parts of the country were in a dilemma. Even though Li Qitian had clearly stated in the imperial decree that he was inferior in terms of provisions, for the stability of the country and for the people of the Central Plains to not be ruled by foreign races, there were still soldiers and horses from all parts of the country who rushed to the capital. In the old capital, Pang Shao, Yun Yankai, the leader of the 100,000 South Pacifying Army in the south, the newly appointed Commander Feng, also received the imperial decree. Commander Feng was ordered to command the 100,000 South Pacifying Army to guard the area between Dezhou and southern Yan. He was originally idle. In addition, the South Pacifying Army was led by Pang Shao and was well trained. Commander Feng had previously served under Pang Shao. As soon as he received the imperial decree, he immediately rushed to the old capital to discuss with Pang Shao. Wang Yi. The capital is in a state of emergency. The Titan people dare to bully our capital. This is simply unbearable. As long as you give the order, our 100,000 South Pacifying Army will immediately follow Wang Yi to the north. I don't believe that we, a group of good men, can't beat those boorish Titan people. Pang Shao laughed and patted Commander Feng's shoulder. Brother Feng is still so forthright. Yes, there are many good men in Dezhou. There are also many people who are willing to do their best for the country. It's our own business to overthrow the incapable ruler of Beiji. But if the foreign races want to invade, they have to weigh their weight. Commander Feng's blood was boiling. He nodded repeatedly. Wang Yi is right. But then he thought about it and was a little worried. It's easy to fight a war. We brothers are not afraid of death. None of us are cowards. But Your Majesty ordered us to prepare our own provisions. This is really difficult for us. Wang Yi, what do you think we should do? Pang Shao smiled bitterly. Then he said in high spirits, what should we do? Even if we have to drink cold water and eat guanyin clay along the way, we still have to rush back and defend the capital. Now that we're in this kind of situation, can we not care about Dezhou and not save Your Majesty because of these reasons? Wang Yi is right. Commander Feng nodded repeatedly. Yun Yankai also sat in the hall and discussed with them. He heard Pang Shao and Commander Feng's words clearly. He also had a deep understanding of Pang Zhao's prestige in the army. It seemed that even if he left the South Pacifying Army for a long time, Pang Zhao's influence in the South Pacifying Army was not to be underestimated. Needless to say, the brave Tiger Army led by Pang Shao was even more so. It was no wonder that the Qiu family valued Pang Shao so much. Pang Shao seemed to only notice Yun Yankai now. He said with a smile, Yun Daren has worked too hard these days for disaster relief. However, once Your Majesty sends a decree to rescue the king, this king will have to rush back to the capital. In the future, disaster relief will still be handed over to Darren. Yun Yankai hurriedly stood up and said, Wang Yi is too serious. These days, the provisions that Wang Yi purchased have been sent over. In addition to the provisions sent over from the Wang Fei's farmstead, it is enough for the people to survive this winter. Wang Ye's character is noble. He uses his own money to feed the people and is not willing to take credit for it. This official is truly impressed by Wang Ye's nobility. Yun Darren is too serious. Pang Shao waved his hand in shame. This king is far from enough. Right now, Dezhou is in danger. This king is about to rush back to the capital. This old capital will be entrusted to Yun Darren. This is this official's duty. Yun Yankai saluted. Pang Shao and Yun Yankai exchanged some pleasantries. Then, he told Commander Feng, go back and tell the brothers to get ready and listen to orders to break camp and set out at any time. Everyone, bring rations. Along the way, this king will think of a way to make sure everyone doesn't starve. We naturally believe in Wang Yi. Commander Feng and Pang Shao saluted and quickly left. Pang Shao pondered for a moment before rushing back to Qin Manor. Although the weather in the south was still cold, it was still far from being as cold as the capital. Pang Shao only needed to wear a cloak over his thin outer robe to deal with the cold. Qin Yining, however, wore a large cloak with a fur collar and curled up in his quilt. The charcoal stove in the room was burning. Qin Yining was still a bit cold. He was sitting on the side of the bed and had Bing Tang tie him up to take his pulse. Although only half a month has passed, the pulse this time is very obvious. Bing Tang's face was filled with joy as he said with a smile, Wang Fei's pulse is smooth and round like a ball bearing. It's an obvious pregnancy pulse. Congratulations, Wang Fei. You're really pregnant. Ji Yun, Han Shao, and Zi Yuan couldn't help but laugh at the sight. Qin Yining also smiled happily. After Pang Shao used that medicine, she could finally confirm her pregnancy pulse. She could also confirm that Pang Zhao's body was fine. Congratulations, Wang Fei. Ji Yun led the maidservants to salute. Qin Yining smiled and responded. He raised his slender white hand and waved. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the maidservant outside greet him loudly, Wang Yi. The curtain was lifted. Pang Shao untied his cloak and walked around the screen. Seeing Qin Yining's smiling eyes and the maidservants' happy faces, he couldn't help but ask, what's wrong? What good thing happened? Why are you all smiling like this? Bing Tang smiled and came forward, congratulations, Wang Yi. Wang Fei is already 1 month pregnant. Congratulations, Wang Yi. The maidservants bowed again. Pang Shao stood by the bed and stared blankly at Qin Yining. She seemed to be stunned and didn't know where to put her hands and feet. You're saying that Sister Yi is pregnant? Qin Yining pretended to be angry and snorted, why does it look like Wang Yi is very unhappy? Chapter 11:21. Qin Yining hadn't seen Pang Shao act like a child for a long time. He couldn't help but laugh. Pang Shao strode to the bed and sat down next to Qin Yining. His eyes were still full of surprise. He looked Qin Yining up and down, as if he was looking for a treasure. Bing Tang and Ji Yun looked at each other, then quietly left with Zi Yuan and Qin Yining, gently closing the door. What are you looking at? Is it the first day you recognize me? Pang Shao stretched out his long arms and hugged Qin Yining in his arms. He sighed contentedly and happily, that's great. Zhao and Han are going to have a younger brother and sister. Qin Yining rested her head on his shoulder. She was surrounded by the faint fragrance of grass and wood on his body and the unique cold fragrance of winter. She nodded with relief, I just hope that Zhao, and Han, won't not recognize their mother when they see me next time. Pang Xiao pinched her cheek, they won't. Father-in-law and grandmother pay special attention to these things. Didn't the two children keep looking at our portraits before? Besides, I will end the current situation as soon as possible. I won't let you and the children be separated forever. Hearing the excitement in his voice, Qin Yining asked with a smile, is there any progress in the court? Your Majesty has ordered all the troops to enter the capital to save the emperor. That was to be expected. The Taitan people were about to reach the capital. If Li Qitian didn't give an order, would he just sit and wait for death? Qin Yining sat up straight. Her long hair fell softly on her shoulders with her movements, reflecting her fair face. It seemed to be glowing under the light. So, you're going to lead the troops into the capital to save the emperor. There's also the South Pacifying Army. Feng Dazhuang has already discussed it with me today. Your Majesty also asked the troops to prepare their own provisions. Qin Yining laughed mockingly. If you eat this bowl of soup now, it won't be easy to digest it in the future. When the world was in chaos, there were many people with lofty ideals from all over the country. Who could guarantee that after entering the capital, no one would be disloyal? At that time, what would Li Qitian use to guard against them, and what would he use to reward them? Could it be that he was still only moving his mouth? Pang Xiao's slender fingers slid through her soft, silky hair, which was slightly cold to the touch. I had originally planned to bring you with me to the capital this time. But your situation is different now. Qin Yining smiled and interrupted Pang Xiao's unfinished words. You don't want me to stay in the old capital, do you? Pang Xiao was at a loss for words. That was indeed what he thought. But looking at Qin Yining's bright eyes that seemed to have seen through everything, Pang Xiao couldn't say anything. Aren't you afraid that I'll be kidnapped? This place isn't far from the Qiu family's property. Qiu Feishan is an unscrupulous person. Last time, her negotiation with you fell through, so she definitely won't give up easily. She will definitely find all kinds of ways to achieve her goal. Pang Xiao's expression changed when he heard this. Come back with me. Pang Xiao grabbed her hand, his dry lips falling on the back of her delicate hand. Qin Yining laughed out loud. Don't worry, I know what to do. Let's go back to the north first. If it's really not suitable to take me with you, you can find a suitable place to hide me. He said it like he was going to hide a treasure, but she really was his treasure. Okay, I'll listen to you. Pang Xiao saw Qin Yining and told her to eat first. Then he went out to discuss with the strategists about returning to the capital. Although the disaster relief in the south wasn't smooth, Wang Yi scattered all the treasures, giving the people some time to breathe. Now, there are only 2 more months until spring and flowers bloom. If they work hard this year, they won't starve to death. Xiaoyu smiled, 2 more wrinkles appeared on her face. Su Weiji also said, maybe by the time the autumn harvest comes, the Taitan people will have been driven out. How can it be that easy? Pang Xiao couldn't help but laugh. The Taitan people have the support of the Liu family this time. The Liu family has also allied with many Beiji people to restore the country's old subordinates. This war is going on extremely anxiously. Jilan isn't a stupid person. When it comes to war, even if I go against him, I'm afraid I won't be able to gain the upper hand. Now that he's being suppressed, it's all because of objective reasons. Wang Yi is right. Duke Ding is also brave and good at war, but he can't control the imperial court. The supplies from the imperial court haven't arrived yet, and the soldiers are hungry. Naturally, they are resentful. In addition, Gao Wenliang is giving orders from the side, so it's even more difficult to mobilize the troops. Moreover, after being defeated once, twice, their morale will be damaged. All kinds of unfavorable conditions are stacked together, but Duke Ding still managed to catch up. Everyone sighed. He didn't have the right time, place, and people. It was hard for Ji Ziyu to persist until now. Pang Shao and the other strategists had a careful discussion. The departure of an army was not like the departure of a few dozen of them. They had to go through a strict deployment. Fortunately, everyone was experienced. The matter of marching an army was not a difficult problem. Pang Shao led everyone until all the details of returning to the capital had been finalized. He then ordered people to make preparations. Immediately after, he stood up and went to the inner residence. Why is Wang Yi in such a hurry today? Looking at Pang Xiao's back, Su Weiji was somewhat puzzled. Perhaps he's about to set off, so he still has many things to prepare and bring along. After all, this was the Wang Fei's maternal home. Everyone was puzzled, but in the blink of an eye, they dropped their hands and went to busy themselves. Pang Xiao dashed back to the inner residence and stared at Qin Yining without blinking, afraid that something would happen to her if she bumped into something. Even Bing Tang and Ji Yun were busy packing their luggage. Pang Xiao was afraid that they would disturb Qin Yining. Wang Yi, what are you doing? I'm very well now, and I don't feel anything wrong with my body. Why is Wang Yi so nervous? Pang Xiao shook his head repeatedly. You are pregnant, so you have to be more careful. I'll have people prepare a few more layers of mattresses in a bit, and the duck feather mattress you made for me. It'll come in handy this time, so the carriage won't be jolted. Qin Yining could only nod and agree. With you by my side, nothing will happen. Why are you so nervous? How could he not be nervous? The reason he had hardened his heart to use that medicine was because he was afraid that Qin Yining would suffer the pain of childbirth again. Who would have thought that the heavens had their own plans, and she still ended up pregnant? Pang Xiao still felt fear when he thought about the events of the past. It was truly too dangerous for a woman to give birth. Pang Xiao could only be anxious, but he couldn't help. He could only constantly be careful of Qin Yining's situation, pay attention to all the details, and do what he should do to the extreme. Just as Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were intensely planning the itinerary and preparing the army to return to Jing to rescue the king, Li Qitian was sitting in a daze in the imperial study. The battle report in his hand seemed to have a temperature, becoming hotter and hotter, so hot that he couldn't help but loosen his grip. A thin piece of paper floated to the ground, but the news on it seemed to weigh 1,000 kilograms, so heavy that Li Qitian couldn't breathe. Bastards, bastards! You're all a bunch of trash. Li Qitian suddenly exploded and roared angrily. 100,000 tiger army, 5 military battalions, and the Divine Arms Battalion actually couldn't defeat a mere Titan. Retreat to Jing. If we lose Jing, Dezhou's imperial court will no longer exist. Where else can we retreat to? Your Majesty, please quell your anger. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War fell to his knees with a thump, trembling in fear. Xiong Jinshui and the other eunuchs also knelt in a corner, not daring to make a sound for fear that Your Majesty's attention would shift to them. Aside from their fear of Li Qitian, everyone's hearts seemed to be shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. Ji Ziyu and Gao Wenliang's troops were defeated like a landslide, and their group was already retreating to Jing. Once the Titans' iron hooves broke through the city gates, wouldn't they all be buried with them? They really wanted to leave this troublesome place, so that they wouldn't end up losing their lives even though they didn't get much money. Li Qitian was full of anger and had nowhere to vent it, but he couldn't think of any other way, so he could only agree to it. When he returned to Yangxin Palace Hall, he felt as if grass had grown on his body, making him restless. He walked out of the door with his head down, holding his breath as he wandered outside. Before he knew it, he had arrived at Cunning Palace Hall. Cunning Palace Hall was warm in the afternoon, and both inside and outside were lit with silver frost charcoal. The Empress was leaning on the warm Kong, reading a book. When she heard the palace servant greet her, she hurriedly got up and gracefully bowed. "Chinchilla greets your majesty." Li Qitian was like an enraged fighting bull. He snorted from his nostrils and sat down with a dark face, panting heavily. His furious appearance caused everyone in the Palace of Earthly Tranquility to keep quiet out of fear. The Empress tried hard to recall what she had done recently, for fear that she had done something wrong and made the Emperor unhappy. But she couldn't think of anything even after racking her brains. She could only give up and blame everything on the imperial court. The palace maid brought in a tea tray. The Empress turned around and took the white porcelain bowl. She held it with both hands and gently placed it beside Li Qitian's hand. She said softly, "Your Majesty, please have some tea." Li Qitian's face was ferocious. He gritted his teeth and looked at the tea bowl. His anger, fear of the future, and jealousy of Pang Xiao seemed to no longer need to be concealed in front of his wife. He waved his wide sleeves, and the tea bowl was fiercely overturned on the ground. The sound of broken porcelain made the Empress tremble. "Your Majesty, please calm down." The Empress hurriedly ordered the palace maids to pick up the pieces. She didn't dare to use brooms and dustpans, for fear that the sound of sweeping would disturb the Emperor. Li Qitian didn't appreciate her kindness. In his anger, he didn't care about his face and shouted, "Calm down, calm down. Everyone only wants me to calm down, but they can't think of a practical way. Are the soldiers of Dezhou 3 years old? When they meet the Taiden, they are scared witless and only know how to retreat." The Empress didn't dare to say a word. After hearing such bad news, it was no wonder that Your Majesty was furious. Even she, a woman, felt a chill in her heart. It was as if the knife of the country's destruction was hanging over her head. Li Qitian slammed the table and said angrily, "Pang Zhishi, that insidious and cunning bastard. I knew that guy was scheming, but I didn't expect that he would ignore the safety of the country and the imperial court." When the Empress heard Li Qitian mention Pang Xiao, her heart suddenly jumped. Could it be that Pang Xiao went to the south and rebelled? Li Qitian slammed the table and said angrily, "I don't know where he got the money to buy food wantonly. If it weren't for him, Duke Ding's army wouldn't be short of food and fodder, and the morale of the army would be in chaos. Pang Zhishi is really born to suppress me." Chapter 11:22. The Empress let out a long sigh. As long as Pang Xiao didn't rebel, Dezhou could still be saved. She didn't think she was a smart woman and couldn't be compared to Prince Zhongshuan's consort. However, she had been in a high position for a long time and often interacted with noble women. The Empress knew a little about the affairs of the court. The stability of the world didn't depend on Li Qitian, but on Pang Xiao. If Pang Xiao was willing to be a subject, everything would be fine. However, if Pang Xiao had the intention to rebel, Li Qitian wouldn't be able to stop it. This was also the reason why Li Qitian repeatedly wanted to eradicate Pang Xiao. As long as Pang Xiao didn't rebel, they wouldn't be attacked from the front and back. There was still hope for the current crisis to be resolved. The Empress smiled and persuaded, "Your Majesty, please calm down." Prince Zhongshuan was ordered to provide disaster relief. It is also his duty to buy food to feed the people. Please don't be angry. This is precisely the time when there are internal and external troubles. We need Your Majesty and the subjects to work together to resist the Tartars. If Your Majesty misunderstands Prince Zhongshuan, I am afraid you will fall into the trap of someone with ulterior motives. The Empress's voice was neither fast nor slow. She carefully observed Li Qitian's expression. After she finished speaking, she didn't see Li Qitian fly into a rage on the spot. The Empress secretly sighed in relief. She secretly thought that Your Majesty was a smart person and wouldn't act rashly at such a critical time. However, perhaps she was relieved too early. Li Qitian looked up at the Empress with a dark face for a long time. Suddenly, he grabbed something and threw it at the Empress. The two weren't far apart and the Empress wasn't on guard. She only felt a buzzing sound in her head and a hard object hit her forehead. It was so painful that she blacked out and even lost her mind for a moment. Looking at the broken porcelain plate on the ground, Li Qitian roared like a roaring lion. Good, very good. Over the years, I have actually raised someone else's Empress. The Empress had just come back to her senses when she heard this. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately realized that she had said too much. Lifting her skirt, the Empress knelt down and kowtowed 3 times. Her ears were buzzing and her head hurt, but she didn't care. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Your concubine did everything for your Majesty's sake. Now that they urgently needed to resist the Titan, there was no time to think about other things. Your Majesty is a wise ruler of the present age. You have thought through everything clearly. This concubine spoke too much because she was worried. I shouldn't have interfered in court affairs. I won't do it again. Li Qitian narrowed his eyes and stared at the Empress's figure. His anger subsided a little. He knew his wife well. This woman was just an ordinary village woman. She was kind and efficient in her work. She was lucky to have married him and had the opportunity to become the Empress. All these years, she had been well-behaved and had never participated in the affairs of the imperial court. She was also a clumsy person. If she knew how to conduct herself, how could she have interceded for Pang Xiao? Although Li Qitian was open-minded, he still couldn't calm down. He sneered, people like you can't distinguish between inside and outside. Those ministers in the imperial court all have their own considerations. I didn't expect you to be the same. You really make me feel disgusted. The Empress felt cold all over, as if she had been thrown into an ice cave in the dead of winter. When they were just ordinary husband and wife, even if they weren't very sweet, they were still a harmonious couple. However, as Li Qitian climbed higher and higher, she also became farther and farther away from him. Now, he didn't like her anymore. She was old and faded, but there were many young girls in the palace who were as delicate and beautiful as flowers. Thinking about it, after being husband and wife for so many years, Li Qitian had seen all kinds of prosperity. Even if their familial love had been wiped clean. Although thinking like this could comfort herself and make her feel better, there was a voice in the Empress's mind that denied her. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining had been married for many years, but Pang Xiao had never treated Qin Yining the way Li Qitian treated her. He had made a fool of her in public, made her lose face, and even hit her. The Empress lowered her head and pursed her lips. She didn't know how to persuade Li Qitian or what else to say. She only felt disheartened and didn't have the energy to care about what Li Qitian wanted to do. Li Qitian saw that the Empress didn't speak and felt that Cunning Palace was no longer interesting. Seeing the Empress like this made him feel even more nauseous. He immediately got up and walked out. The Emperor flew into a rage in the Empress's palace and even smashed the Empress with a bowl. This news spread like wildfire and quickly spread throughout the imperial palace. When the concubines came to pay their respects the next day, they couldn't help but take a few more looks when they saw the Empress's bruised forehead. Some people even laughed wildly in their hearts. The Empress sat at the head of the table with a decent smile on her face, but her mind was not here. Some of the concubines kept probing with their words, which annoyed the Empress. She directly said, Ben Gong won't talk about the battle outside, but I think you've all heard about it. The Titan army is like a hot knife through butter. Our dynasty is no match for them. Marquis Beiding had no choice but to retreat to the capital. The room was silent. The concubines didn't seem to have the mood to investigate the Empress' injuries. Ji Ziyu had retreated to the capital with his army and the Titan had surrounded the walls of the capital. Once the city was broken, how could they survive? Nyang Nyang, did your majesty say how we sisters will be settled? A concubine boldly asked. The empress smiled and looked at the beautiful young woman. She gently said, you and I sisters are your majesty's concubines. To say something unpleasant, if that day really comes, you and I will naturally have to keep our chastity for your majesty. So if the concubines really lost the battle, they would have to collectively slit their throats. Some of the younger ones were so scared that their faces turned pale. Some even cried on the spot. The empress said, it hasn't progressed to that stage yet. It's not to the point where the army will collapse. However, this consort is saying all of this to give all of you younger sisters a warning. Think about it for the next few days. If you have any regrets, do it as soon as possible. If you miss your family, write to them as soon as possible. If that day really comes, Ben Gong won't allow anyone to betray your majesty. The empress narrowed her eyes and glanced at everyone. She said in a deep voice, do you remember clearly? Yes. All the women stood up and bowed. The empress nodded and dismissed everyone. She then ordered the mama beside her to go to the cold palace. Go and tell the palace maid in charge of the cold palace. It's time to deal with concubine Shun. Yes, this servant will go now. The empress's arrangements made the concubines panic. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Some went back and covered themselves with their blankets and cried. There were also people who anxiously wrote letters to their families, wanting to beg for a way out. For a moment, the palace was in a state of panic. Even the Empress Dowager and Li Helan heard the news. The two had no time to blame the Empress because they were also in fear. The Empress Dowager was older, but she wasn't calm. When she thought about how she, as the Emperor's mother, had nowhere to run, she couldn't help but feel sad. She hugged Li Helan and cried again and again. On the contrary, Li Helan was calmer. She was Ji Ziyu's wife. If Ji Ziyu died in battle, she would definitely be captured by the Titan. If that day really came, as the Empress said, their lives would be hung with white silk. After understanding this, Li Helan calmed down. At this time, the most important thing was not to worry about her own escape, but to think of a way to help Dezhou survive this crisis. Li Helan told the Empress Dowager her analysis and thoughts. The Empress Dowager immediately sent someone to find Li Qitian. Li Qitian was very busy. How could he have the mind to come to Ci and Palace to pay his respects? The Empress Dowager couldn't see him, so she could only ask the chamberlain beside her to pass on a message to Li Qitian, tell the Emperor what I said. The most important thing now is to protect Dezhou from being trampled by the Titan. Peng Zhishi has been on the battlefield for a long time. If she cooperates with Jilan, she will definitely be able to defeat the Titan. Tell the Emperor to think carefully. The chamberlain listened to the Empress Dowager's words and sweated profusely. He didn't want to go, but he didn't dare to go against the Empress Dowager's wishes. But if he went, he had a bad feeling. Your Majesty might not let him go. This situation was basically a dead end. But the chamberlain had no other choice. He could only go to the imperial study, remove the sharpness of the Empress Dowager's words, and relay the meaning. Li Qitian sat behind the Polonia table in the imperial study. His hands gradually tightened and he gripped the bright yellow brocade tablecloth. You dog servant, did the Empress Dowager say this? Replying to your Majesty, the Empress Dowager indeed told me to say this. The chamberlain kowtowed again and again. He already felt that his life was over. Li Qitian sneered coldly, you can't help in the matters of the imperial court, but you never cause trouble. The chamberlain didn't dare to speak. He wished that he didn't exist. Go and tell the Empress Dowager to be prepared. If the Titan really breaks into the city, the Empress Dowager has to set an example. Could it be that the Empress Dowager, who has been wise all her life, is not as knowledgeable as the Empress. This was clearly to let the Empress Dowager be prepared to go on the road. The Chamberlain bowed in fear and left. Returning to Seai and Palace, he told the Empress Dowager Your Majesty's instructions. As expected, the Empress Dowager suddenly stood up and said angrily, Nonsense. How could the Emperor speak to me like this? Could it be that you, a lowly servant, made it up? The Empress Dowager is wise. Even if I had the guts, I wouldn't dare to make up an imperial edict. Your Majesty did say this. The Empress Dowager was so angry that she felt dizzy and flew into a rage. If it weren't for her identity as the Empress Dowager and that she was no longer the village woman she used to be, she would have cursed out everything dirty and smelly. The Empress Dowager was so flustered, let alone other people. From top to bottom in the imperial palace, no one was not flustered. They tried to find a way to survive. Although Li Qitian was concerned about the matters of the imperial court, he had heard several versions of the rumors in the imperial palace. Before the Titan reached the capital, someone had already determined that he would lose. Was he really not going to pass this hurdle this time? When Pang Shao finished preparing everything and the army was ready to set out, it was already 3 days later. Qin Yining walked out of the inner residence of Qin's mansion with the help of Pang Shao with a delicate hand-warmer in her arms. She took a carriage and left through the side gate, heading all the way to the gate of the old capital. Pang Shao's mount, Black Cloud, followed beside the carriage. The rest of the bodyguards guarded the carriage. Chapter 11:23. In the early morning of winter, the sun was not very hot. The distant mountains and wastelands were all gray. The 100,000 South pacifying army had already gathered. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the army looked solemn. The vast and mighty army seemed to have gathered into a vast ocean with no end in sight. What surprised Qin Yining and Pang Shao the most was the gathering of nearly 1,000 able-bodied men near the city gate. They were holding hoes, shovels, door bolts, and other things. Everyone was carrying simple bags. When they saw the carriage leave the city gate, they immediately looked over with anticipation. Yun Yankai had been in front of the city gate for a long time. He quickly walked to the front of the carriage and said, Wang Yi, these 961 men heard that Wang Yi was leading the South pacifying army into the capital 3 days ago. They specially rushed over and planned to join Wang Yi's army and head north together. Pang Shao raised his eyebrows in surprise. He put down the curtain and patted Qin Yining's hand before getting off the carriage. Xiaoyu, Su Weiji, and the other strategists also got off the carriage and followed behind Pang Shao. Pang Shao cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, Fellow villagers, the Titan War is critical. This king is leading the army into the capital to rescue the emperor. There will definitely be a bloody battle with the Titan. Swords have no eyes on the battlefield, and the cruelty is far beyond your imagination. You may very well lose your lives because of this. When the real battlefield arrives, this king cannot guarantee everyone's safety. Please go back. Wang Yi. A man who was over the age of 30 stood out and shouted. We can only survive by eating the food Wang Yi bought. If it wasn't for Wang Yi, we would have died long ago. Now that the Titans are bullying us, there is no reason for Wang Yi to lead people to fight while we can live peacefully at home. Yes. Another handsome young man in his early 20s said, the country is in trouble and needs manpower. Although we are lowly citizens, we know what kind of situation the great Zhou dynasty will be in if it falls into the hands of the foreign races. We are willing to do whatever we can to help the Han people. Wang Yi, please grant my wish. After the two of them started, more than 900 people immediately chimed in. The roars of the crowd reverberated in front of the city gate. Even the South pacifying army led by Commander Feng in the distance were shocked. It was said that Pang Shao used his own money to buy provisions to feed the people. There were also people who secretly mocked Pang Shao for being stupid. But now, such a shocking scene proved that his efforts had paid off. The common people were simple and honest. Today they were willing to follow Pang Shao, perhaps they had the intention to join the army and eat the soldiers' pay. This was understandable, it was human nature. Whether it was because they knew how to repay kindness, or because of their patriotism, it was admirable. In the face of a national crisis, the rich and powerful didn't step forward. Instead, it was the ordinary people who stepped forward. It really made one sigh with emotion. Pang Shao bowed and thanked him gratefully. After repeated inquiries, Pang Shao confirmed that these people were indeed determined to join the army to save the emperor. Pang Shao then discussed with Commander Feng and incorporated these untrained new soldiers who had never seen a battlefield into the South pacifying army. With 100,000 people heading to the capital, the army was vast and magnificent. But the most important thing was how to gather provisions after the disaster. After leaving the old capital, Pang Shao returned to the carriage. There was a bit of melancholy between his brows. Qin Yining handed him a water bag, "Drink some hot water." Pang Shao hurriedly took it and smiled. "How do you feel? Are you okay?" Qin Yining smiled. "Of course I'm okay. I didn't do anything along the way. I just sat in the carriage and watched the show. How can I not be okay?" Qin Yining leaned closer to Pang Shao and asked with a smile, "Are you worried about feeding so many people?" Pang Shao nodded and said honestly, "Before the troops and horses move, the provisions have to be prepared first. Although I have ordered people to purchase them in advance, we don't have enough money. But first, we don't have enough silver. Second, we've already used up a lot of our food reserves during the disaster relief. Now, we have to feed 100,000 people. The imperial court won't pay for this, so it's a huge expense." Her phoenix-like eyes looked at Qin Yining and instantly turned into a smile. "Well, don't think too much about these things. Just take care of your body and give birth to the child safely in the future. That's enough. Don't worry, I will do my best to deal with the imperial court." Qin Yining pulled his hand and shook it. He thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. Pang Shao saw her laughing like this and couldn't help but laugh. He hugged her waist and let her lean on his body. "Why are you suddenly so happy? Did you think of something fun?" "Indeed, I have a way to raise provisions, but this method is a bit unconventional." Pang Shao raised his eyebrows curiously. "What good idea did you think of?" Qin Yining leaned close to Pang Shao's ear and whispered his idea. Pang Zhao's eyes became brighter and brighter as he listened. When Qin Yining told him his plan, he couldn't help but laugh. "Little girl, I can't believe that you can come up with such a plan. Now we don't have to worry about provisions." Qin Yining was surprised. "I was forced to do this. It's not a solution. Although it's a bit despicable, it can solve the urgent problem. Things like conspiracies are not despicable. If we were in different positions, that person wouldn't be so lenient to us. He might do something even worse than us. Do you think my idea will work?" "Of course." Pang Zhao's finger brushed the tip of her nose. He said with a smile, "Don't worry, this method is easy. I'll order people to do it. Let's not follow the troops. I'll have Commander Feng hold the line. We'll go first to prepare provisions and make all the preparations. That way, we won't lose the morale of the troops due to hunger." Qin Yining also nodded. "That's what I mean. It's good for us to go first. When everything is ready, we won't be flustered." Pang Shao and Qin Yining discussed it in a low voice. After confirming there were no mistakes, they got off the carriage to find Xiaoyu, Su Weiji, and the other strategists. When the strategists heard this idea, their furrowed brows couldn't help but relax. They gathered together and laughed. Wang Fei is lucky to think of such a method. Good, this old man feels this method is very good. That's right. Actually, we aren't creating rumors. What we are saying is the truth that the people want to know. Very good. Then let's arrange for people to go. Huzi took out a blue booklet and flipped through it. He said with a smile, found it. The first place we passed was Jiuhe County. There's a wealthy family here with the surname Xia. Their family is very large. The entire county can be said to be related to the Xia family. Those who don't have the surname Xia are very envious of the Xia family. Actually, the most difficult place to set up is a place like this where everyone is united. However, the best place to set up is also a place like this. Su Weiji said with a smile, if they are so united, they will naturally respond to a call. In addition, it's not easy for such a large family to operate to this extent. No one wants their family's legacy to end in their hands. Therefore, if the clan head calls for it, the other families will be easy to set up. Xia Yu and the others nodded and then looked at Huzi. Xia Yu praised, it's all thanks to your detailed records. Huzi scratched his head and said with a smile, at the time, I was afraid that these people's information would be useful in the future, so I didn't want them to go back on their word. Therefore, during the transaction, besides keeping records, I also investigated all the wealthy families who sold us grain. I couldn't do anything about those in the north who were far away and had high mountains. Pang Xiao patted Huzi's shoulder in praise, it's all thanks to your cleverness. This matter was handled extremely well. After everyone agreed, Pang Xiao and Qin Yining left the South Pacifying Army with their men and headed straight for Jiuhe County. Pang Xiao had provided relief here before. Now that the disaster had been alleviated, the relationship between the local magistrate and the common people had become much closer because of this natural disaster. Everyone was now living frugally, hoping to survive this winter and wait until the spring plowing season. Everyone was grateful to Pang Xiao. Therefore, even though Pang Xiao and his men did not enter the city, they were still seen by the people passing by outside the city. Everyone spread the news and everyone knew that Pang Xiao and his family were passing by here. They did not want to enter the city and disturb the people, so they temporarily set up camp outside the city. The people could not take out anything now, but it did not affect their feelings of gratitude. Pang Xiao and his men had just stopped to set up their tents when many people rushed out from the city gates. When they saw Pang Xiao, they all greeted him and some people even took out the rice they received from the disaster relief and offered it to Pang Xiao and his men. There were even people who went to help the Jinghu Wei set up their tents. Pang Xiao saw that these people were trying their best to do something for him and felt warm in his heart. It was as if all the pain and anxiety was worth it. Wang Yi, has the disaster relief in the south ended? After the people got to know Pang Xiao, they found that he was an easygoing person and gathered their courage to chat with him. Pang Xiao smiled and said, the disaster relief in the south has not ended yet. It's just that the Taitan people are marching straight in and are about to reach the capital. Your Majesty ordered the entire country's army to enter the capital to rescue the king. This king brought the South Pacifying Army back to the capital because of this. When they heard that the Taitan people had reached the capital, the people became anxious again. If the Taitan people win, what will happen to us? A woman asked the person beside her worriedly. That person's face was pale and he could only shake his head and say, that's not good. I'm afraid we won't have a way to survive. The Taitan people's customs are different from ours. Won't they enslave us like livestock? Everyone had more or less heard about the Taitan people's actions over the years. They were shocked and angry for a moment. When Pang Xiao saw that everyone was almost done chatting, he said, everyone, don't worry too much. Your Majesty is wise and decisive. He will definitely be able to resolve this crisis. This King's South pacifying army of 100,000 people is enough to make the Titans suffer. When the people heard this, they couldn't help but laugh. The originally tense atmosphere became cheerful. However, some young people's eyes lit up. They looked at Pang Xiao nervously and said, "Wang Yi, we also want to go and fight the Titans." A 13 or 14-year-old young man asked straightforwardly, "Wang Yi, if we follow you to fight the Titans, will we be able to get food and pay?" Chapter 11:24. When the commoners heard this, some of the young and strong people began to have ideas. Rebuilding their homes after a disaster was a long process. If they stayed at home, when would they be able to return to their former days of self-sufficiency? They were all men in their prime. In this famine, it was simply one person can eat his fill while the whole family starves. They couldn't remember how long it had been since they had a full meal. If they followed Wang Yi to fight the Tatars, they could eat. Perhaps they could even make a name for themselves and give their families a chance to turn things around. Why wouldn't they do it? Those who had lost their families because of the famine and one person can eat his fill while the whole family starves, wanted to follow Pang Xiao even more. If they stayed here and farmed for the rest of their lives could be considered stable. However, they didn't know when natural or man-made disasters would strike, so they might as well follow Wang Yi and make a name for themselves. Wang Yi was a kind and honest person. He wouldn't use their lives to make up for his own merits. If they followed someone like this, their chances of success would be higher and their safety would be guaranteed. Many of the men immediately signed up with Pang Xiao, hoping to join the army. There were also some who still had family members. They returned home with heavy hearts to discuss this matter with their families. Qin Yining could clearly hear the conversation outside the tent. He couldn't help but smile. It seemed that doing good deeds for others had its benefits. It was unknown when the good deeds they had done before would have a positive impact. If there were people who were willing to join the army, then they were all sincere followers of Pang Xiao. These people were much better than those who were unwilling to join. Moreover, when the military supplies were insufficient and the war was tense, it was a battle of numbers that mattered. Just as Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were taking their people to rest outside the city, other than many people wanting to follow Pang Xiao, there was also a rumor that spread like wildfire. "What? Your Majesty is going to punish us?" In the main hall of the Xia clan's main branch, the Xia clan's patriarch gathered all of the clan's elders and young men together and announced the inside information that he had just received. The few of them had already been scared stiff. Some of the more impatient ones loudly said, "Why? Why should we be punished? What did we do wrong?" The Xia clan's patriarch frowned and shook his head, saying, "What did we do wrong? Your Majesty is going to punish us. Who can question it? Can anyone ask why? Your Majesty previously asked for grain, we did not respond. Instead, we sold the grain to Prince Zhongshuan. Now Prince Zhongshuan's disaster relief is going smoothly, but because your Majesty is unable to support the army, the Titan army is marching straight into our territory. Tell me, as long as your Majesty can breathe through this, will he not settle accounts with those who sold grain to Prince Zhongshuan at a high price?" Everyone fell silent for a moment. Although they were well off, they were still ordinary commoners. How could they guess the intentions of their superiors? However, if he were to put himself in their shoes, the imperial court would need to feed the Tiger army during the invasion of foreign enemies. They would need to collect grain, but they could not do so. The reason was that these merchants had sold the grain to someone they had always been afraid of. If it were them, they probably couldn't wait to cut off these people's heads. What should we do? That's right, what should we do? Since these words have reached our ears, it must mean that your Majesty is really angry. He must have already punished some people nearby. We can't bear the wrath of the Emperor. Everyone was gloomy and gloomy. There were even some people who stood up and complained, "We should have said that we didn't need to sell the grain and just gave it to the army. In such a big famine, so many commoners have starved to death, yet we are holding on to the grain and selling it at a high price. Aren't we profiting from a national disaster? What do you think? Just do as I said, and there will be trouble in the future. What's the point of saying all this now? Right now, how can we avoid your Majesty's wrath? We have already sold the grain to Prince Zhongshuan. We can't ask for the grain back." Some of the smarter ones immediately thought of a way. "It's impossible to get the grain back. The grain has already been eaten. However, we can return the money." Everyone's eyes lit up. Xiao Leoi said, "That's reasonable. If we didn't sell the grain and instead helped Prince Zhongshuan relieve the disaster, we would be a benevolent and righteous family. No matter how angry your Majesty is, he can't punish us like this. This money is hot, so we can't keep it." They had sold so much grain and earned a lot of money. Now that they were asked to take out the money, everyone was a little reluctant. However, when they thought about how their entire family could be destroyed under the emperor's wrath, the money was nothing. Thinking of this, everyone gathered together to discuss. In the end, they decided that Xiao Leoi would personally take the grain and money to see Pang Xiao outside the city. At Pang Xiao's side, Huzi and the others who had gone to the city to spread the news in advance had already returned. After hearing about the situation in the city, Pang Xiao ordered Huzi to arrange for people to continue to set up according to the address of the large family who had sold them the grain in the account book. Early the next morning, Qin Yining woke up in Pang Xiao's arms. As soon as he opened his eyes, he heard footsteps outside the tent. Qin Yining quivered and completely woke up. He raised his head to look at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao smiled and said, "You're awake." "Yes." Qin Yining nodded and propped himself up. His soft long hair scattered behind his back. He looked outside in confusion. Is there someone outside? Perhaps people from the Xie family came. Pang Xiao sat up and put his cloak on Qin Yining's shoulders. They came early in the morning before the sun rose. Then why don't you go out and meet them? Qin Yining tightened his collar. What if they don't have the patience? They won't. Since they came, it means that they really believe that your Majesty will settle the score with them. Compared to money, the lives of the entire family are naturally more important. His large hand caressed Qin Yining's cheek. You have to have confidence in yourself. When will the plan you come up with not work? Qin Yining was amused by him and laughed out loud, shaking his head. You only know how to coax me. Recently, I feel that my brain is not working well. When I was pregnant with Brother Zhao and Brother Han, I didn't think that I would become so stupid. Sometimes, I'm afraid that I'll give you the wrong advice. Pang Xiao laughed out loud and caressed Qin Yining's fair face again. If you're willing to be a little stupid, perhaps the other women in the world will feel better. At least, they won't feel inferior. Sweet words. Qin Yining reprimanded softly. Pang Xiao smiled and went to call Bing Tang and Ji Yun to serve Qin Yining. He got up and went outside by himself. Old Master Xia came with food before the sun rose. He didn't expect Pang Xiao to immediately agree to meet him, but since it was for the survival of the entire family, he had to show his sincerity. He couldn't let Wang Yi feel unhappy at all. Finally, when the sky was dark, the people in the other tents in the camp were moving around, but Wang Yi didn't come out. Old Master Xia was a little anxious. Wang Yi must have known that he came with people but avoided meeting him. Could it be that your Majesty gave Wang Yi an imperial edict and was determined to take their lives? The more Old Master Xia thought about it, the more afraid he became. Just as he was about to reach the peak of his anxiety, someone finally came to pass on a message. Old Master Xia, Wang Yi invites you. Old Master Xia let out a long sigh of relief. He straightened his expression and went to Pang Zhao's tent. When he saw him, he wasn't as arrogant as last time when Pang Zhao came to buy food. He respectfully bowed. This commoner greets Wang Yi. Old Master Xia. Pang Zhao had a smile on his face. Old Master Xia, why have you come this time? I don't dare. Old Master Xia thought of the arrogance in his words last time and regretted it. His attitude became even more humble and respectful. I heard that Wang Yi is leading an army to the capital to rescue the emperor. This old man has specially prepared some food and money. Please accept it, Wang Yi. Oh. Pang Zhao raised his eyebrows. Old Master Xia means. Old Master Xia said righteously and sternly, as a citizen of Dezhou, when the country is in danger, I will naturally do my best. Wang Yi, please don't mind. As he spoke, he took out a stack of banknotes and presented them with both hands. Even his fingers were trembling. Pang Zhao solemnly took the banknotes and said in a deep voice, Old Master Xia is indeed kind-hearted and cares about the country and the people. This king truly admires you. The Xia family is truly a benevolent family. Xia Leoi repeatedly said, I don't dare. He then said, Your Highness, the journey to the capital is long. Please take care. You are the Zhou dynasty's god of war. If you fall ill from exhaustion, how can you resist the Tatars? This kind of compliment was very superficial. Pang Zhao smiled, and then chatted with Xia Leoi for a while. Pretending to be unintentional, he said, If Xia Leoxiansheng is a great philanthropist who cares for the common people and the country, this prince will definitely report this to His Majesty, so that he can reward him in the future. Old Master Xia was delighted, but his expression remained normal. He didn't dare to let Pang Zhao see his pride and excitement. He only said, This is what this old man should do. Old Master Xia left behind several carriages of food and left with his servants. Pang Zhao returned to Qin Yining's side and counted the banknotes. He smiled and said, I remember it was written on the palm. This is what he took from us. Sister Yi, you really are a female zhuge. Things really are as you said. These people are here to return the money for the sake of their families. But spreading rumors and causing trouble is not honorable. Pang Zhao smiled and said, In order to achieve their goals, they will do anything. These people who profited from the country's calamity have harmed countless people. Today can be considered a small punishment. Moreover, I feel that you have understood Your Majesty's heart very well. Based on my understanding of Your Majesty, he is vengeful and jealous. In the future, he will definitely settle accounts with these people who sold the banknotes to us but refused to donate them to him. You letting people say this outside is exactly what he wants. Qin Yining nodded slowly. He patted his cheek and said, You are right. This is a matter of life and death. It is not the time to be soft-hearted. Pang Zhao felt that since Qin Yining was pregnant, she began to be sentimental again. Her mind became more sensitive. He hugged her and shook her. Your idea is excellent. If it weren't for you, I don't know how to feed 100,000 people. With the treasure they returned, I can buy food. The Southern Pacifying Army can only defeat the Taitan when they are full. Only when the Taitan is driven away, the people can live a stable life. So what you did was right. You helped most people. Chapter 11:25. Outside the tent, Xia Yug, Su Weiji, and the other strategists were following Jinghu Wei to count the rations. Looking at the cart full of rations, Su Weiji couldn't help but sigh. When Wang Yi left the capital, Your Majesty gave him 8 carts of rations that were even worse than this. The Xia family, a large family in Jiuhe County, can take out so much rations, but Your Majesty can't. It can be seen that the imperial court is really nervous. That's not necessarily true. Your Majesty just wants to make things difficult for Wang Yi. Jinghu Wei was very dissatisfied with Li Qitian's behavior. Xia Yu smiled. They followed Pang Shao all the way to the south. Along the way, not only did they save the victims of the disaster and win the hearts of the people, but they also made everyone who followed Pang Shao more certain of their choice. It was their fortune to be able to follow such a benevolent person. Your Majesty just ascended the throne. Although his thoughts are deep, his vision is limited. In addition, as the emperor, no one dares to say anything about his actions. There are also those flattering people egging him on from the side. No matter what Your Majesty does, there will be people following behind him to flatter him. Over time, Your Majesty will become like this. The imperial court has been suffering from natural and man-made disasters, but Your Majesty still insists on doing things his own way. He thinks that as long as he becomes the emperor, everything in the world will belong to him and he can do whatever he wants. This is something that can't be helped. If what they said was spread, it would be enough for the emperor to kill them several times. But people have emotions. They were full of dissatisfaction and couldn't care less about that. In any case, regardless of whether Wang Yi rebelled or not, the emperor was very afraid. He would frame Wang Yi for crimes even if he didn't have any. They were all Wang Yi's followers. If they ruined things, the emperor wouldn't let them off. As they spoke, they recorded the food in the book and marked the date, time, and where they got it from. Now that they had a plan, their days had a bit more to look forward to. After Jiu He's grain collection was completed, Pang Shao ordered people to continue to scout out where else they could purchase grain. At the same time, he arranged for a group of people to bring grain to wait for the arrival of the South Pacifying Army. By the time the South Pacifying Army set up camp near Jiuhe, the food that Pang Shao obtained through this method had also arrived. South Ping Army's 100,000 people were originally worried about the food problem, especially those who had just joined the army. They were all victims of the disaster. Although they trusted Pang Shao a lot, they would only have the strength to do something after the food problem was solved. Now seeing so many provisions, everyone was relieved. When Commander Feng and several Fusho were talking, their voices were a little louder than usual, which made the civilians who had just participated in the meeting stunned. What kind of person is Wang Yi? It's not like our South Pacifying Army didn't live a hard life before. But when Wang Yi came, he led us to live a good life. You ask how we lived a good life. The imperial court didn't give us food, so Wang Yi led us to find food. At that time, all the bandit nests near the old Dian capital were picked by us brothers. We ate the bandits to protect the civilians. Who doesn't give a thumbs up when they talk about our Wang Yi? The new soldiers' blood boiled when they heard this. They all lamented that they didn't have the luck to follow Wang Yi to suppress the bandits. And the person they were talking about had already gone to the next place where there was food. He used the same method to find food and silver. Not only did he find a lot of silver from the treasure, he also had a way to buy more grain. There were even many civilians who planned to follow Pang Shao and join the South Pacifying Army to fight against the Taitan together. The South Pacifying Army could be said to have grown a little stronger. At this time, the various armies that came to save the emperor were also heading towards the capital. The mountains were high and the roads were long, so the time they took to reach the capital was different. When Pang Zhao's group was halfway there was already an army of princes that entered the capital. Li Qitian was very happy. He waved his brush and arranged for Ji Ziyu to lead them. Ji Ziyu had lost a lot of weight these days. His originally handsome face that was like a banished immortal was originally cold and expressionless. Now, his expression was even less, and he spoke even less. The Taitan soldiers were at the city gates. The imperial court had no money or food, but he had to think of a way to defend this last city. If the capital fell and the Taitan invaded, the entire capital would become a purgatory. This was the most difficult battle Ji Ziyu had ever fought in his life. Because he had no way to retreat, he had no other choice but to defend with all his might. Fortunately, the armies that came to save the emperor arrived one after another, so he wasn't caught off guard. However, the soldiers' pay was insufficient. Now, all the soldiers, including Ji Ziyu himself, could only eat porridge to fill their stomachs. They were all young men of the right age. No one could stand eating porridge 3 times a day. Everyone was so hungry that they were crying out, but there was nothing they could do. Ji Ziyu never mistreated his soldiers. However, the treasury was empty now. Your Majesty's internal treasury had been used to buy materials for the construction of the imperial mausoleum. The imperial court really couldn't take out any money to sell food, let alone pay the soldiers' pay. Ji Ziyu stood on the high city walls. The cold wind of early spring blew on his face like knives. The red cloak fluttered behind him like a fluttering flag. Ji Ziyu looked coldly at the pale morning light. In the distance, there were Titan tents set up on the plains. Those tents were connected to each other, forming a magnificent scene outside the capital. This feeling was like a knife to one's throat. It made one lose the ability to think and feel emotional. They became flustered and at a loss. Duke, Anyang's eldest princess is here. A guard walked closer and whispered. Ji Ziyu didn't turn his head and said, "This is a battlefield. Let the princess go back. This is not a place she should be." "How is this not a place I should be?" Li Helan's voice came from behind Ji Ziyu. Li Helan wore a silver fox fur coat and a red pomegranate skirt. When she walked, her skirt fluttered slightly, revealing the soft furred deerskin boots she wore. She personally carried a food box and said with a smile, "Consort Ma refused to accept my summons for many days. I missed him so much that I had to come uninvited." Around them when the soldiers heard this, they all lowered their heads, pretending they didn't hear these explicit words. Ji Ziyu looked back expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "This is not a place you can play. Go back." Li Helan couldn't keep the smile on her face. She pursed her lips with a dark expression. Just as she was about to speak, Ji Ziyu's deputy general smiled and said, "Princess, please don't worry. It's our duke who is worried about the war situation and has no time to think so much. This place is indeed extremely dangerous. There are often stray arrows piercing from the side. Yesterday, there were even people who died on the city walls. The Duke is also worried about you. The Tatars can see that we don't have enough food and are purposely fighting with us to make us use up what little food we have left. They may soon organize an attack to harass us. Swords have no eyes. If the Duke is too busy and the princess is injured by stray arrows, how do you think the Duke will deal with it? I hope the princess can understand." His words were reasonable, making Li Helan's heart feel a little better. In any case, ever since she met Ji Ziyu, she had never seen him smile or speak. Most of the time, he would be impatient with her. She was angry, but she also felt that Ji Ziyu's cold attitude towards her in public made her lose face. Therefore, she spoke with sarcasm. "I'm just afraid that you'll starve to death on the city walls. If anything happens to you, the common people will suffer. Do you think I'm willing to come here to feel the cold wind? Take it." She handed the food box to the front. Ji Ziyu still ignored her. He frowned and observed for a while, then suddenly turned and left. When he passed by Li Helan, he didn't even bother to look at her and said in a low voice, "Everyone, be on guard." As soon as he said this, it was obvious that the Titan was about to make a move again. Li Helan was angry at first because of the cold shoulder, but in the blink of an eye, she was shocked by the sudden situation. The personal guards couldn't care less and immediately brought a few people to escort Li Helan down the city walls. As for the exquisite food box, no one cared about it as it was placed on the city walls. After Li Helan went down the city walls, she was half forced into a carriage and sent back to the eldest princess residence. When the carriage gradually left the city gates, the Titan people were already attacking from outside the city gates. For a moment, the cries of Dezhou's soldiers and the Titans filled the sky. Li Helan was so scared that she forgot to breathe. This was a cruel battlefield. If you don't die, then I die. The carriage turned a corner. Even if Li Helan leaned half her body out the window, she couldn't see the battle on the city walls. However, Li Helan could vaguely feel that she could see Ji Ziyu on the city walls. It was another fierce battle to defend the city. In less than 2 hours, the Titan people had retreated. They were like this during this period of time. It seemed like they weren't trying to directly attack the capital, but rather to use up the limited resources and energy of the capital's defenders. When Li Qitian heard the news, she was also very anxious. She paced back and forth in Yangxin Palace Hall by herself. Even Xiong Jinshui, who was her personal attendant, didn't dare to approach Pang Xiao right now. He was afraid that if Your Majesty didn't act RUE, she would vent her anger on them. Even though they were still far from the city walls, Li Qitian could still hear the sounds of the Titan people fighting. He was also an emperor on a horse and had fought in his early years. However, after living like a prince for so many years, Li Qitian had not only put on weight, but he had also forgotten all his strategies. When he thought of going to the battlefield, he would be excited in the past, but now he was very resistant. He was even a bit resistant. I just want to be a wise emperor. Why is it so difficult? As an emperor, why can't I do what I want? Li Qitian murmured in a low voice. His voice echoed in the room, causing Xiong Jinshui and the other attendants to lower their heads. At this moment, a eunuch suddenly rushed in and knelt in front of the caltrop flower gate. His voice was loud and cheerful as he said, "Reporting to Your Majesty, 2 princes' troops have arrived at the southern city gate." Li Qitian was overjoyed. "Quick, open the city gate. Let them enter the city and go to the northern gate to meet up with Ji Lan. Tell them to follow Ji Lan's orders." "Yes." The eunuch turned around and scrambled away. Chapter 11:26. Your Majesty, swords and knives have no eyes. The battle at the city gate is intense. If something happens to you, how are we going to live? Xiong Jinshui had a bitter expression and tried to persuade him, "Your Majesty, please spare me. Can I go and find out the situation for you?" Scram! Li Qitian was in a good mood. Even though he was annoyed by the nagging, he only kicked Xiong Jinshui. Xiong Jinshui cried out and staggered 2 steps before stabilizing himself. He did not dare to say anything else and quickly followed Li Qitian to arrange for Your Majesty to leave the palace. Now that the battle was intense, it was not a small matter for the emperor to leave the palace. No one could guarantee that there were no Tatar spies in the capital. If something happened to Your Majesty, they would not be able to pay for it even if all of their families were killed. The eunuchs and guards bitterly went to prepare. They carefully and cautiously went to prepare the carriages and horses. The imperial carriage and the guards left the palace gate and went straight to the north gate. Ji Ziyu was counting the casualties and setting up defenses. Suddenly, he heard someone report that the emperor had arrived. He could not help but frown. He brought his followers and walked down the city gate tower. From afar, he bowed to Li Qitian, "Your Majesty. No need for formalities. You have worked hard in this battle. How is the situation? Did the battle ease up after the troops joined in?" Ji Ziyu honestly nodded his head. It can indeed alleviate some of the problems, but these people come from all over the world. Their training methods are different, and some of the soldiers do not even understand the normal language of the Great Zhou Empire. It is not easy to deploy them. Li Qitian nodded in understanding. Of course, there was nothing we could do about it. Luckily, we have more people. If the Titans suddenly sent a large number of troops, we would not be flustered because of a lack of manpower. I also know that you are used to leading the Dragon Legion Corps. Unfortunately, the Dragon Legion Corps is trapped, and at least half of them are dead. I also know how you feel, but as the ruler of a country, you have to make a choice. Not everyone will be satisfied. When Li Qitian said these words, Ji Ziyu just stood there expressionlessly with his head lowered. It seemed that he didn't hear him and didn't care if Li Qitian could satisfy his request. Ji Ziyu had always been cold, and Li Qitian was used to his reaction. Seeing that he had no intention of refuting her, she felt even more comfortable. You have made great contributions in this battle. I will definitely reward you handsomely. Li Qitian's tone was extremely excited. Ji Ziyu replied calmly, I'm just doing my duty. Your Majesty really doesn't have to do this. Sigh, I know that you are wholeheartedly devoted to the country. However, just because you have noble character and unquestionable integrity doesn't mean that everyone is like that. There will always be people fishing for fame who will slander me behind my back. In the face of a national disaster, there are also many people with ulterior motives who not only refuse to help, but also keep dragging us down. Li Qitian put his hands behind his back and slowly walked toward the city gate that was half open due to the clearing of the battlefield. Ji Ziyu frowned slightly and followed behind Li Qitian. Li Qitian said in a low voice, You have also seen what Pang Zhishi has done during this period of time. I have been really worried these days. The matters of the court are already complicated, and the Titan people are also very stubborn. I have to raise so many troops to fight against the Titan. I originally thought that when the people of Dazhou encountered such a national disaster, they would definitely lend a helping hand. Those large families with grain would also lend a helping hand for the safety of their own people. However, I never thought that Pang Zhishi would actually undermine me. Tell me, where did he get so much money to buy grain from the wealthy families? Didn't he use my name to swindle people outside and make those people willingly take out their money in grain? He has earned a good reputation, but I can't raise any grain here because of his schemes. Seeing the soldiers fight the Titan with empty stomachs, I feel really uneasy. Ji Ziyu's voice didn't have any emotion. He just stated the facts calmly, Your Majesty, grain is indeed a big problem. If people don't eat, they will starve to death. Dead people can't fight against the Titan. Li Qitian choked. He was a bit angry and embarrassed, but also a bit helpless. He said so much because he didn't want Ji Ziyu to mention the grain. Anyone who was smart and knew how to get along with people would understand that he didn't want to talk about the grain. However, Ji Ziyu still said this. Li Qitian didn't even know how to respond for a moment. Seeing that Ji Ziyu was silently waiting for his answer, Li Qitian said, I understand. I will think of a way. Think of a way, think of a way again. Every time this topic was brought up, Li Qitian would use this kind of excuse. However, after so many years, the food in the army still hadn't improved. The reason why the soldiers were able to hold on was because he took the lead and charged at the front like a flag. Fortunately, he had some false reputation back then and had some prestige in the army. Otherwise, how long could they hold on? Moreover, Li Qitian's distortion of Pang Zhao's story made Ji Ziyu almost unable to suppress his anger. Your Majesty arranged for Pang Zhao to go to the disaster area and didn't give him any grain. Pang Zhao thought of a way to get money to save the lives of the people. Shouldn't he be rewarded? Why did Pang Zhao have the ability to get money to buy grain? Why did it become Pang Zhao's fault for delaying the emperor's request for grain from the rich merchants? In the past, Jiziyu had thought that Li Qitian was a wise ruler because they fought together and experienced the cruelty of the battlefield together. They also understood the value of life and knew how important it was to overthrow Beiji. Unfortunately, things had changed with the passage of time. Back then, they started an uprising to prevent the people from suffering. Now, Li Qitian had forgotten and became the main culprit who harmed the people. Ji Ziyu shook his head. After sending the emperor away, he pondered for a long time and still wrote a letter to Pang Shao. When Pang Shao received this letter, it was already the beginning of the 3rd month. At this time, a group of people were stationed in a quiet field. The grain they bought was stored everywhere near and far. Some people who were willing to follow Pang Shao were now patrolling near the grain carts. Pang Shao ordered someone to arrange for the person who delivered the letter for Jiziyu to rest. He read the letter carefully and then frowned slightly, looking deep in thought. Qin Yining saw that Pang Shao's brows were furrowed. He put down the hot tea in his hand and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Did something happen in the capital city?" Pang Shao shook his head hurriedly, "Nothing. It's a letter from Alan." Qin Yining raised his eyebrows. "Marquis Dingbei rarely writes to you. This time, he suddenly wrote to you. Something must have happened." After saying that, she tilted her head and looked at him. Her long hair fell smoothly behind her back, making her look more delicate. Pang Shao was defeated by her gaze. He handed the letter to Qin Yining and muttered in a low voice, "Didn't they say that pregnancy makes one stupid? Why is my sister Yi still so hard to fool?" Qin Yining was right beside him and naturally heard his words clearly. She looked at the letter and rolled her eyes at him. However, when she saw the content, she laughed mockingly and lost the mood to joke. "How much does your majesty hate you?" He even said this to Marquis Dingbei. In the letter, Ji Ziyu reminded Pang Shao not to return to the capital. He was afraid that once he returned, Your Majesty would kill him regardless of everything. This was because the emperor's dissatisfaction and jealousy had reached an extremely serious level. He's not as talented as you and is unwilling to accept others. This kind of person has a good life. He can actually be the emperor for so many years. Pang Shao was amused by Qin Yining's serious disdain for Li Qitian and laughed. The gloominess in his heart disappeared for a moment. "All right, what's there to be angry about? Ever since he became afraid of me, it was impossible for him to trust me. No matter what I do, it's wrong. Besides, his suspicions are not wrong. It proves that his brain is not too stupid. Although I don't want to expose him, I use the money for disaster relief. It's just that we have different standpoints." Qin Yining shook his head. As an emperor, he can't control his greed. This will cause a tragedy. It may not be too late for him to turn over a new leaf, but I don't think he will change. Pang Shao shrugged indifferently. It doesn't matter. Even if he is like this, what can he do to me in such a tense situation? Qin Yining was also amused by Pang Shao's appearance. Yes, they had made sufficient preparations. If Li Qitian wanted to do anything, he would have to see if Pang Shao agreed or not. However, when he thought of Li Qitian's actions, Qin Yining still felt depressed. He increasingly disliked Li Qitian and concluded that if Li Qitian did not change, the common people would suffer in the future. His thoughts of overthrowing Li Qitian gradually took shape and became correct. Pang Shao wrote a reply to Ji Ziyu. Although the person who delivered the letter was Ji Ziyu's trusted aide, it was not Pang Shao. Pang Shao was worried that the letter would be read by someone with ulterior motives. Therefore, he only wrote a few words in his reply and did not mention the current situation at all. As for Ji Ziyu, he was gradually losing patience. There was not enough food, and all the soldiers were starving. Li Qitian, on the other hand, could not think of a solution. He even shamelessly asked the army to prepare 2 cabins. He was just short of writing an IOU to borrow. GCU had been leading troops for many years and was very thorough in his analysis of war. He could make a series of judgments based on a few clues. If Pang Xiao was willing to join, he would definitely find a way to protect Pang Xiao and maintain a peaceful environment in Dezhou. However, Pang Xiao was blocked outside by Li Qitian. Even the army did not think of letting Pang Xiao come. If he spoke too much, he would only offend the emperor. In the future, if Pang Xiao was targeted, he would lose the emperor's trust and advantage. At that time, it would be impossible for him to speak up for Pang Xiao. At this time, Pang Xiao had already traveled 60% of the way. The number of people who were willing to follow Pang Xiao along the way was simply beyond Qin Yining's expectations. Pang Xiao ordered people to make a register so that it would be easier to record everyone's age and family situation. Qin Yining's morning sickness was getting more and more serious. Even eating thin porridge would make him feel disgusted. Bing Tang diligently nursed Qin Yining back to health. Mu Jinghu stayed by Pang Xiao's side all day long to prevent him from being plotted against. Chapter 11:27. Mu Jinghu's face immediately darkened. I don't want to see her. If you want to see her, you can see her. On his delicate face, the word disdain was almost engraved on his forehead. Pang Xiao smiled helplessly. She is Yen Er's mother after all. Not for anything else, but for Yen Er, I want to see her and see what is going on. Speaking of his son, Mu Jinghu's face wavered. But Qiu Feishan had schemed against him, used him, deceived him. He had given his heart to Qiu Feishan, but Qiu Feishan had given him false feelings in return. Pang Xiao understood Mu Jinghu's thoughts very well. His big hand patted his shoulder. Let's see what she has to say. No matter what, she is still your son's mother. Mu Jinghu pursed his lips, feeling extremely depressed as he followed Pang Xiao out of the tent. Pang Xiao's team was growing stronger by the day, and with the delivery of provisions, the security around the camp was even tighter. Looking at it, the camp was extremely spectacular. The two dismissed the rest of the people, and went straight out of the camp. From afar, they saw a row of carriages parked at the side. The curtain of the blue horse carriage in front was lifted, and Being was looking out. When her eyes met Mu Jinghu's, she immediately pushed Qiu Feishan aside. Qiu Feishan was still dressed in men's clothes. A gray coat with raccoon fur was draped over the white collar of the arrow sleeves. Her fair and handsome face had a bit of tiredness, and she immediately looked over. When she saw Mu Jinghu, her eyes lit up, and she quickly supported Being's hand to get off the carriage. Mu Jinghu's hands were clenched into fists behind his back, and he stiffly looked away. Qiu Feishan's eyes darkened, and then she perked up. Has Wang Yi been well? Thank you for your concern, Boss Qiu. This king is very good. Pang Xiao's tone was kind. Qiu Feishan looked at Mu Jinghu affectionately, and asked with a smile, how about you? How have you been recently? You don't have to worry. Mu Jinghu said stiffly and then became impatient. If you have something to say, just say it. You don't have to be so pretentious. I'm a stupid person and I'll never be as smart as you. If you have any schemes, you don't have to do it. I have nothing to do with you anymore. Hearing this, Qiu Feishan's eyes turned red. She took a deep breath and smiled. Don't say that. Brother Yen can call me father now, but you're not here. Mu Jinghu pursed his lips. Even if I'm not around, he's still my son. He is him and you are you. I can tell the difference. So you must be like this with me. Isn't that what you want me to do? Qiu Feishan raised her head and took a deep breath. She rationally changed the topic. Wang Ye's army provisions have been temporarily solved, but to fight against the Taitan, we lack the imperial court's provisions. Wang Yi knows the financial resources of the four links, and I intend to do my best. She turned back and pointed to the carriages behind. Those are the provisions I brought. Even if Wang Yi refused to cooperate with me, I still brought the provisions to you. Pang Xiao didn't have the patience to talk to any woman other than Qin Yining, especially someone like Qiu Feishan, who was full of schemes. Moreover, her tone seemed to be reminding Pang Xiao that last time Pang Xiao refused to send troops to fight against the Taitan and Lu Heng's alliance. Now, he still had to go to the Emperor's aid, and even had to prepare his own provisions. Such a tone of kindness was really unpleasant. Moreover, when had Pang Xiao suffered such a loss? Boss Qiu is considerate. Pang Xiao naturally would not embarrass Qiu Feishan in front of Mu Jinghu. He only said tactfully, "This king is not talented, but he has enough provisions. If Boss Qiu wants to do something for Dezhou, why don't you open a porridge stall with these provisions to help the people get through the difficulties? It can be considered as doing a good deed and accumulating merit." Qiu Feishan was speechless. She did not expect that Pang Xiao would still refuse to accept the help of the four links at this time. "Wang Yi, do you know what you will face when you return to the capital? There is no need for me to tell you how many old officials of Northern Ji are secretly loyal to Lu Heng, and there is also no need for me to tell you about His Majesty's fear of you. Let's just say that with so many soldiers and horses, we can still support them for the time being because we are in a hurry. However, when we are on the battlefield, Your Highness will no longer be able to prepare the provisions. If there is a problem with the provisions, do you think Your Highness can rely on His Majesty to feed so many people?" Qiu Feishan said what Pang Xiao had been thinking about these days. Although he had not found a solution, Pang Xiao was still very stubborn. Boss Qiu need not worry about this. Since this king can bring so many people to the Emperor's aid, he naturally has a way to provide for these people. This king appreciates Boss Qiu's good intentions. Qiu Feishan was rejected like this in front of Mu Jinghu. She was really unhappy, especially when she met Mu Jinghu's disdainful eyes. She felt ashamed as if she had been stripped naked. What did she do wrong to make Mu Jinghu treat her like this? Qiu Feishan's eyes were hot. She immediately lowered her eyes and blinked. She calmed down and smiled as usual. Wang Ye's words are reasonable. It's just that the provisions are in front of us, and once Wang Yi agrees, the four links will continue to support the South Pacifying Army in the future. Wang Yi will no longer have to worry about food. Is Wang Yi really going to refuse such a good thing? Pang Xiao smiled but did not say anything. Qiu Feishan almost could not keep her smile. Pang Xiao cupped his hands and said, "This king still has things to do, so he will go back first. Boss Qiu, please help yourself." Mu Jinghu saw Pang Xiao leave and also turned to leave. The cold wind of early spring made Qiu Feishan shiver. Looking at Mu Jinghu's resolute back, her heart felt like it was thrown into the snow and trampled on. Buying gritted her teeth and held Qiu Feishan's arm. "Miss, young master is too much. You brought the provisions from thousands of miles away, isn't it because of him? But he treated you like this." Qiu Feishan shook her head and pursed her lips. "I deceived and schemed first. I didn't expect him to have such a big reaction after knowing. You worked so hard to pretend to be sick and took so much medicine. Wasn't it all for young master's safety? If you didn't want to transfer him away from the center of the struggle and away from trouble, would you have to do this?" Bai Ying's face was red with anger. This servant has never seen such a stubborn person. Qiu Feishan turned back and walked to the side of the carriage. Looking at the group of carriages she brought, she stood there for a long time before regretfully and dejectedly saying, "He bears such a grudge against me now. It can be seen how much hope he had for me in the beginning. People will only have such a great resentment when they give their heart but don't get anything in return." He is a person who clearly distinguishes between love and hate and values friendship. In the end, I misjudged him from the beginning. What Qiu Fei Shan didn't say was that at that time, she had calculated everything, including Mu Jinghu. At that time, her feelings for Mu Jinghu were not as good as they were now. She was snatched away by Mu Jinghu and was forced to marry Mu Jinghu by Tian Jizi. In order to achieve her goal, she had no choice but to agree. But even if they were husband and wife, there was still a knot in her heart. Her feelings for Mu Jinghu only grew stronger after the matter was exposed and he was determined to break off the relationship with her. Only then did she understand that perhaps she had feelings for Mu Jinghu long ago, but she just didn't realize it. However, she was not born to be an ordinary girl. She had the mission of a hidden family on her shoulders. Now that the Qiu family was out in the open, she had more things to do. Those were the rules passed down from generation to generation. She could not go against them, nor could she put matters of love above her mission. How can I have the best of both worlds? Qiu Fei Shan's white hands held onto the carriage, her brows tightly knitted together. Mu Jinghu and Pang Xiao had already returned to the cab. Pang Xiao could not help but worry when he saw Mu Jinghu's silent appearance. Blockhead, you don't have to be like this. She is your wife after all. Think more about Yanji. He is still young, you still have time to think. But he is a little older and more sensible. Are you still not willing to go home? Don't worry, I have my own plans. Mu Jinghu said confidently. Pang Xiao immediately understood. He shook his head and said, "You are thinking too simply. If a child wants to grow up happily, he still needs to grow up in a warm environment with both parents. You have been with your master since you were young and have never lived a normal child's life. Do you want Yanji to be like that too? If he asks you for his mother, what will you do?" Mu Jinghu was speechless for a moment. He did not know what to say. Pang Xiao patted his shoulder. This world is not black and white. Blockhead, Boss Qiu has her own motives. Although she deceived you, she is still your wife. If you are not willing to forgive her, your family will be ruined. As a brother, I really don't want to see your life become like that. And I am part of the reason. Mu Jinghu shook his head, don't say that. I hate her for using me and deceiving me. What does it have to do with you? Looking at Pang Xiao's concerned eyes, Mu Jinghu looked down and was silent for a moment. He said, "Don't worry, I will think about it." Pang Xiao could not force Mu Jinghu too much. He patted him on the shoulder again before walking away. Qin Yining heard about today's matter and laughed. Don't worry, Qiu Feishan is resourceful. If she wants Yanji Mu to change his mind, she has many ways. Yanji Mu is a kind person. They will reconcile sooner or later. You mean Boss Qiu might use a scheme? It's hard to say, but she has enough means. Moreover, she will not harm Yanji Mu. Even if there is a scheme, it is for their family of 3. You and I should not interfere. Qin Yining picked up a sour plum and put it in his mouth. A small round bump appeared on his cheek. It is better to tear down 10 temples than to destroy a marriage. Yanji Mu really likes Qiu Feishan. If they can reconcile, it will be good for Yanji. Don't think too much. Pang Xiao listened and laughed. He pointed his finger at Qiu Feishan's cheek. Do you think I am such a petty person? But Boss Qiu brought food at this time. It is a huge temptation. Chapter 11:28. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded, his big hand caressing her cheek. I've always known that you're an open-minded person. You won't fuss over small matters. I was worried that you'd hate Boss Qiu and don't want to interact with her anymore. It's fine if I don't interact with her, but I like Yanji very much, and Mu Gongzi has helped us a lot. Our relationship is so complicated, how can we completely cut off our relationship? As for being open-minded, I can't say that. I'm very petty, but I know what's most important right now. Pang Xiao couldn't help but laugh. I don't see how you're petty. It must be very difficult for Moo Moo to be caught in the middle, and I don't want him to be in such a dilemma. The next time I see Boss Chiu, I'll be more polite. The next time she comes, she might avoid Mu Gongzi. Qin Yining thought about Qiu Feishan's temperament and couldn't help but sigh again. She's a proud person, and Mu Gongzi has humiliated her twice in front of you. How can she bear it? I don't know how sad she'll be when she goes back, and when she comes to find you again, she'll have to wait until her heart is completely calm and she's past that hurdle. Pang Xiao raised his eyebrows, believing Qin Yining's words without a doubt. Mu Jinghu was a kind person, and he certainly hoped that his friend could be happy. It seemed that he had to think more for Mu Jinghu in the future, and leave some face for Qiu Feishan when he sees her again. Even Sister Yi, a woman, could be so open-minded. How could he, a man, hold on to the past and not let go, and make things difficult for his brother? In the next few days, even if Pang Xiao was in a hurry, he still looked for opportunities to persuade Mu Jinghu. At first, Mu Jinghu was very resistant, but in the end, perhaps he was persuaded, and he often just kept silent. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining went to the capital, and along the way, they took the same road as when they came to the disaster relief. Needless to say, they were welcomed and loved by the people along the way, and many people joined the South Pacifying Army. Originally, there were 100,000 South Pacifying Army when they set off from the old capital, but when they arrived at the capital, the number of soldiers following Pang Xiao had increased to 280,000. This was a huge number. When Li Qitian learned that Pang Xiao had actually brought 280,000 men with him, he was so shocked that he jumped out of his dragon chair in the imperial study. He pointed at the spy who had answered him and asked in a sharp voice, "What? You're saying that Pang Zhishi brought 280,000 soldiers back? Where did he get the money to feed so many people?" On the way back, the south, on the way back to the capital, when he returned, on the way back to the capital, and the people on the way back. Once, there, est, s, rich, to the s, the v have been to t, as people, on his t, to the v thems that s for a time, t. Now that GZU's troops had been incorporated into the armies of the various princes, there were no more than 100,000 soldiers in total. Pang Xiao alone had brought back 100,000 elites and 180,000 new soldiers. Once Pang Xiao had the intention to rebel, GZU and Gao Wenliang would have to resist the Titan. Who else would be able to stop Pang Xiao? Wouldn't he, the emperor, be stretching his neck and waiting for Pang Xiao to chop it off? He could already see the scene of Pang Xiao's army breaking into the capital and directly forcing him to abdicate. Li Qitian's back was soaked with sweat, and he didn't say anything for a long time. The spies knelt on one knee and lowered their heads, quietly waiting for Li Qitian's orders. After a long time, Li Qitian ordered Xiong Jinshui with a hoarse voice, "Go, summon all the ministers. We want to attend court." "Yes, Your Majesty." Xiong Jinshui heard the order and rushed out. After hearing the conversation between the emperor and the spies clearly, Xiong Jinshui's heart turned cold. If the Prince Zhongshuan attacked, they, who had served the emperor closely, would probably lose their lives. He originally thought that serving the emperor was a good thing, but now he felt that he had made a bad move. For the past few days, the Titan had been besieging the capital. GZU's army stubbornly resisted. The people of the capital were tightly protected, but they could often hear the sounds of fighting and roaring on the battlefield. The medical centers in the capital and the nearby temples were all helping to treat the sick and the injured. The people often saw the miserable state of the sick and injured. This was the first time they were so close to war, and the first time they felt the shadow of death so clearly. Everyone was worried. Some people felt that the capital was no longer safe and planned to move their families. There were also people who felt that the capital was the heart of Dezhou. If it was lost, it would be useless no matter where they fled. Just as everyone was in a state of panic, the emperor, who had already held a small court meeting, urgently arranged a large court meeting. Some of the officials were still working, and some had already returned home. As soon as they heard the news, they immediately rushed back. The people were used to seeing the officials calm, but this was the first time they were so anxious. Many people secretly discussed, did something big happen in the imperial court? Could it be that the Tatars were about to attack? Li Qitian did not have time to think about other things. When the officials gathered, he immediately said, Pang Zhishi's 280,000 troops are expected to arrive tomorrow. My beloved officials, what do you think? You can speak freely, I will definitely not blame you. Your Majesty, this old official thinks that Prince Zhongshuan is wholeheartedly devoted to the country. This time, he brought troops to rescue the emperor. If Wang Yi and Marquis Dingbei join forces, the Tatan will definitely be defeated. This is truly a joyous matter. That's right, Your Majesty, Marquis Dingbei has already suppressed the Tatan. With Prince Zhongshuan, our Dezhou will definitely win. Some people have always supported Pang Shao to take over the position of the commander of the Tiger Army. Your Majesty has always been against it, but the war has reached the capital. Once the army is defeated, they will all become slaves of a subjugated country. At this time, the first thing to consider was whether they could win the war. As for other things, they did not consider them at the moment. Li Qitian did not say anything, but his slightly furrowed brows and his constantly changing sitting posture in annoyance showed that Pang Shao did not agree. Thus, someone stood out to persuade him, Your Majesty, please do not listen to the shallow words of these people. Your Majesty ordered all the troops in the world to rescue the emperor. Prince Zhongshuan has not completed the disaster relief mission. He is not the commander of the Southern Pacifying Army, but he brought troops here this time. He really has ulterior motives. Once you lead the wolf into the house, the consequences will be unimaginable. These words entered Li Qitian's heart, but he did not immediately express his position. At this time, a sturdy general stood out. His eyes were as wide as copper bells, and his elbow-sized fists were clenched tightly. It was as if he wished he could rush up and punch that person just now. Damn you for leading the wolf into the house. When Wang Yi led the troops to war, you were still chewing your nails under your mother's skirt. You are a coward who only knows how to flatter. If you have the ability, then go kill the Tatars with a knife. At this time, you are slandering Prince Zhongshuan. What are your intentions? You boorish and boorish man, how can you behave atrociously in front of your Majesty? Bah! Don't try to sow discord between your Majesty and me. Right now, we are talking about Prince Zhongshuan. Why are you talking so much? The Southern Pacifying Army only has 100,000 soldiers, but Prince Zhongshuan brought back 280,000 soldiers. Isn't it obvious at a glance what his intentions are? If he really doesn't have any ulterior motives, then why is he in such a hurry to recruit soldiers? That is because the common people are grateful to Wang Yi for saving their lives. Wang Yi saved many people along the way. The common people want to repay him, so they voluntarily followed Wang Yi to fight the Tatars. That is Wang Yi's rallying power, and also the common people's benevolence and righteousness. Compared to you, a beetle who only knows how to point fingers, even the common people carrying hoes are 100 times better than you. Seeing that the situation below was the same as before, with those who supported Pang Shao and those who opposed Pang Shao quarreling again, there was no help at all. Li Qitian rubbed the space between his eyebrows in annoyance. Right now, he was extremely regretful. If he didn't arrange for Pang Shao to go to the disaster relief, How could he have the opportunity to win over the people's hearts? Now, not only were his arrangements disrupted, but Pang Shao also seemed to have won the people's hearts. On the contrary, he became the bad guy. Pang Shao was simply born to be at odds with him. Enough. Li Qitian stood up and looked down at the two people who had stopped quarreling in front of the throne room. He snorted coldly, turned around, and left in a huff. The ministers looked at each other in dismay. They had never seen Your Majesty leave in the middle of a court session. Could it be that the emperor urgently summoned them to a court session just because of Prince Zhongshuan? Even when the Taitan's display was so urgent, Your Majesty was not so anxious. Some of the smarter ones had already seen Li Qitian's taboo from his reaction. It seemed that compared to foreign enemies, Your Majesty was more wary of Prince Zhongshuan. Qin Yining was standing to the side while holding Ji Yun's hand, watching Jing Zhe and the others neatly set up the tent. Recently, she had been vomiting so much that she almost vomited when she smelled rice soup. In addition, they had to hurry on with the journey. After a few rounds of tossing and turning, Qin Yining's face was full of fatigue. The camp of the 280,000 soldiers of the South Pacifying Army stretched for miles. It was believed that Li Qitian could see this group of people clearly from the top of the city gate. At this point, the Taitan had not had time to attack yet. Everything was still in time. Qin Yining breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, fatigue quickly swept over him. He almost dozed off while holding Ji Yun's hand. Pang Shao brought people to inspect the camp closely. By the time he returned, Qin Yining had already laid down and fallen asleep. Bing Tang sat quietly to the side. When he saw Pang Shao lift the curtain and bow, he quickly stood up and bowed. Pang Shao waved his hand. He first looked at Qin Yining's sleeping appearance, then gestured to Bing Tang to go outside to talk. Bing Tang nodded and followed Pang Shao to a place not far from the tent. Wang Yi. What orders do you have? Is Wang Fei all right? Wang Fei looks weak, but her body has a good foundation. In addition to the previous recuperation, the loss from giving birth to the two young masters has already been recovered. It's just that the journey this time is tiring. For the time being, she should be fine after recuperating. Pang Shao quietly breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. These days, Pang Shao had been so busy with the new recruits that the South Pacifying Army had brought back that his feet did not touch the ground. Fortunately, Qin Yining did not need him to worry about anything. Just as he was thinking this, Huzi quickly walked in from outside. Wang Yi, the news of your return to the capital has spread. The emperor has urgently called for a large court meeting. I don't know what was discussed in the court meeting, but we have not received any orders here. This was expected. Li Qitian's way of doing things was like this. He would definitely think carefully before opening the first net for others to jump in. Chapter 1129. Pang Shao chuckled. Of course we have to wait. If this king acts rashly, I'm afraid some people will be scared to death. We don't know what he will do. Moreover, since we are going to the capital to rescue the king, we naturally have to listen to Your Majesty's orders. There are so many pairs of eyes watching us. Naturally, we have to be more cautious than before. Huzi puffed up his cheeks and said gloomily, the Tatars are right in front of us, but we can't rush up and cut them. It's simply too depressing. I haven't fought a battle to my heart's content in a long time. Pang Shao laughed loudly and patted Huzi's shoulder. What's the hurry? The Tatars are right in front of us. Are you afraid that there won't be a battle to fight? Not to mention Huzi, even he, who had lived a peaceful life for a long time, would be itchy to fight. The Taitan had killed their way from the northern border to the capital. How many big cities had they occupied in Dezhou? How many people had they slaughtered? Owing such a debt of blood, as long as it was a person with courage in Dezhou, they would not be able to tolerate it. However, Li Qitian didn't have a decree at the moment, and they were under the eyes of the world. He had brought 280,000 soldiers to rescue the king, so he would be watched by people with ulterior motives. If he made even half a step wrong, he would definitely be caught red-handed. When that time came, things would be pushed to an uncontrollable point. Therefore, even if he wanted to directly lead his soldiers to charge through the city gate and go through the entire capital to the north to help Jiziyu, he couldn't act blindly without thinking. The South Pacifying Army led by Pang Shao was stationed in the south. The mountains were high and the emperor was far away. The former undisciplined soldiers who only knew how to eat had completely changed under Pang Zhao's leadership. Now, the South Pacifying Army was strictly disciplined. Pang Shao ordered them not to act without permission and to camp outside the city gate and wait for your Majesty's orders. No one objected. Fortunately, it's already spring and flowers are in bloom. Even if we live in tents, we won't freeze to death. Every day Xiaoyu and Su Weiji led their strategists to Pang Zhao's place to discuss countermeasures. When they talked about Li Qitian's arrangement, everybody was surprised and helpless. Your Majesty's fear of Wang Yi has reached the point of disregarding the safety of the capital. This is truly disappointing. You and I have never experienced the tense situation in the capital, yet we are already like this. Every day, the people of the capital see the wounded soldiers being carried down and hear the shouts of killing outside the city. I'm afraid that they are already panicking. The strategists looked at Pang Shao and the others, and they all had the same thought. Xiaoyu pursed her lips and thought for a moment before she said, Wang Yi, this is actually the best time. The attention of the emperor and the imperial court is focused on the Titan, and the money and provisions in their hands are limited. If we attack with all our strength, we will definitely be able to take the capital. Even though he didn't finish his sentence, everyone understood what he meant. Right now, Li Qitian was focused on the Titan. If he wanted to seize the throne, this was the best time. If Pang Shao made a move now, they would definitely succeed in one fell swoop. Pang Shao only smiled when he heard this. I am a citizen of Dezhou. No matter what, I cannot let the people of Dezhou be ruled by an outsider. That will definitely make the people slaves. Even if we can take the capital now, what about in the future? Will there be people who hate me because of this? Will there be people who are not willing to follow me and continue to resist the Titan? Now is not the time to think about these things. Working together to drive the Titan out of Dezhou's land is the most important thing. As for other things, we will think about them after everything is peaceful and the people are safe. I cannot build my great cause on the sacrifice of the people. The strategists who had supported Xiaoyu's words just now all nodded when they heard this. Wang Yi was a benevolent and righteous person. He always put the people first, and this was already very commendable. If they could follow such a wise leader, they would be blessed in the future. Xiaoyu and Su Weiji looked at each other and smiled. Others might not know, but Su Weiji understood Xiaoyu too well. The reason why he said this in front of the strategists was to give Wang Yi a chance to explain his situation. He wanted them to understand Wang Yi's painstaking efforts and the reason why Wang Yi did not choose to directly attack the capital. The reason why Wang Yi made this choice was probably because he considered the people's point of view. However, for bystanders like them, Wang Yi's choice was the one that would bring him the most benefits. As strategists, they naturally had to do their best to think of Wang Yi. When Wang Yi was in a daze, they would make appropriate suggestions. However, in recent days, Xiaoyu and Su Weiji gradually realized that all of Pang Zhao's choices seemed risky on the surface, but in the end, they all seemed to be beneficial to him. Sometimes, even Xiaoyu and Su Weiji felt that Wang Yi was taking risks, but in the end, the dangers were all averted. Could this be fate? Was Tian Jizi's early predictions correct? While everyone was discussing, Li Qitian was also discussing with a few of his trusted aides in the imperial palace. The South Pacifying Army is still stationed outside the city. If we directly let such a large group of soldiers through the city gates like the reinforcements, if Prince Zhongshuan has any thoughts of rebellion, then wouldn't we have no hope at all? Li Qitian was also thinking this, which was why he was particularly conflicted. We have also thought about it. Prince Zhongshuan has fought for Dezhou for many years. In the end, he has made great contributions. We also don't want to suspect him. Those who could be called into the imperial study alone to discuss countermeasures were all Li Qitian's trusted aides. The reason why these people were able to become Li Qitian's trusted aides was because they were able to judge the situation. They were good at judging the situation and understood Li Qitian's thoughts. They were always able to say things that could solve the problem and please Li Qitian. Therefore, at this time, they all had a worried expression. They righteously and sternly said in unison, "Your Majesty, please reconsider." They looked at each other and then said, "Your Majesty, you are an open-minded person. Naturally, you won't think too much. However, we can't help but consider the possibility of a mishap. Your Majesty, you trust Prince Zhongshuan, but that doesn't mean that Prince Zhongshuan will definitely be loyal to you. What if something were to happen? At that time, the situation will be out of control. Your Majesty, please consider carefully." That's right. Your Majesty should think about the great cause first. We also know that Your Majesty's heart is indeed uncomfortable and tormented by not trusting Prince Zhongshuan. However, for the sake of the entire Dezhou dynasty, Your Majesty, please reconsider. Li Qitian's expression was normal. He looked down at the back of his hand as he listened. After a long time, Li Qitian slowly said, "We understand your meaning. Let us think about it." Pang Shao thought that with Li Qitian's temperament, he would resolve the matter within 2 days. He didn't expect that he would lead 280,000 people and wait in front of the city gate for 3 days. 3 days wasn't a long time, but it wasn't short either. However, with a camp of 280,000 people, sooner or later, the food they brought wouldn't be able to support them. Your Majesty's decree still hasn't been issued. It seems that this king will have to urge him. Pang Shao frowned as he pondered. I don't know what Your Majesty is thinking. When the situation is critical, you have reinforcements, but you don't slow down. You don't give us a decree, and you don't give us any pay or provisions. You just let us wait here. What is the meaning of this? Huzi was already filled with anger. However, without Your Majesty's decree, Wang Yi ordered them to stay where they were and not enter the city. They were also not to contact Ji Ziyu in private. Pang Shao didn't want to give others a reason to suspect Ji Ziyu. He didn't want others to see them and think that they were secretly communicating with each other to plot against Your Majesty. However, no one understood Ji Ziyu's current predicament better than anyone else. The various armies that came to rescue Your Majesty all had their own commanders and their own thoughts. Not everyone who came to rescue the king was wholeheartedly loyal to Your Majesty. Most of them had their own motives. It wouldn't be a big deal if they were just complicated people. More importantly, they didn't have enough food and provisions. When soldiers went to war, they didn't even have enough food to eat. The resentment in the soldiers' hearts would only accumulate and deepen. Faced with the pressure of the Taitan army on the battlefield, if they retreated, the people in the capital would be the ones to fall. Under such pressure, how would Ji Ziyu deal with it? He needed reinforcements and provisions, but Your Majesty didn't agree to any of them. These days, it wasn't just the people from the South Pacifying Army who were suspicious. Even the Tiger Army guarding the North Gate felt the same. The wounded soldiers on the battlefield had to be carried back to the city to recuperate. Their situation would more or less affect the mood of the people in the city. However, after being suppressed for a long time, Your Majesty didn't want to do anything. Even the people were complaining now. Pang Shao smiled placatingly. Your Majesty wants to make a decision. In his eyes, this is related to his fate. It will be very difficult for him to make a decision. We don't need to be too anxious. The decree will be given in these 2 days. If this dragged on, the people in the capital would probably make a ruckus before Pang Shao could bring people into the city. Just as Pang Shao said, the emperor's decree was sent to the South Pacifying Army camp the next day. Xiong Jinshui had a bitter expression on his face. His iron-gray sunflower gown was suddenly blown up by a biting cold spring breeze. He was already covered in cold sweat, and at this moment, he suddenly shivered. Not long after, Pang Shao was seen leading a few high-ranking military officers. They rode their horses and arrived from the military camp that stretched as far as the eye could see. When they got close, Pang Shao flipped over and jumped, smiling. Eunuch Xiong. Does your Majesty have any orders? Yes. Commander Feng asked loudly with a rough voice, is your Majesty going to order us to fight the Tatars? Xiong Jinshui swallowed hard and opened the imperial decree. Prince Zhongshuan, receive the decree. Yes, your Majesty. Pang Shao led everyone to kneel down. By the will of heaven, the emperor decrees, Prince Zhongshuan is ordered to lead the South Pacifying Army to take a detour around the capital and go through Jiaxiao Valley. They will outflank the Taitan from the rear and attack the Taitan from the front and back with the Tiger Army. The emperor decrees. Xiong Jinshui was an eunuch. His slightly sharp voice spread in the wind. Everyone who heard it was stunned. Before Pang Shao could speak, Commander Feng jumped 3 feet high. What? The capital is right in front of us. Once the city gate is opened, we can directly rush over and fight the Tatars to the death. Why do we have to take a detour? That's right. We rushed back from afar to solve the siege of the capital. Now, we are here. After giving us the cold shoulder for so many days, now the city gate doesn't allow us to enter and wants us to take a detour. What outflank from the rear? What if the Tatars have already entered the capital by the time we take a detour from Jiaxiao Valley? Huzi also roared angrily. Chapter 1130. Xiong Jinshui couldn't help but look nervously at Pang Shao. Here, Prince Zhongshan was the one who had the final say. As long as he said a word, he could decide his life or death. Pang Shao's expression was calm. There wasn't a trace of emotion on his face. This kind of situation made Xiong Jinshui most afraid. If Pang Shao was willing to vent his anger, it would at least mean that he wasn't so angry that he couldn't speak. But what could he do? Your Majesty had given an edict. Who would question it? Did they not want their heads anymore? All right, everyone, calm down. Pang Shao was silent for a long time before finally speaking. The noisy scene finally quieted down. Everyone looked at Pang Shao, waiting for his orders. Xiong Jinshui swallowed with difficulty. At this time, he deeply felt that as long as Pang Shao gave the order, his soldiers would immediately rebel regardless of the consequences. And he would also become a ghost under the knife. Your Majesty has given an edict. This subject will only accept it. Your Majesty must have his own reasons for making a decision. How can this subject question it? Everyone, don't say anything more. Pang Shao reprimanded in a low voice. Then he accepted the edict with both hands and kowtowed in thanks. Xiong Jinshui let out a long sigh of relief. He felt a great sense of relief as if he had just survived a disaster. He hurriedly bowed and walked out as if there was a hungry wolf chasing after him. Xia Yu and Su Weiji stood on either side of Pang Shao. Seeing Xiong Jinshui leave, they couldn't help but sigh with worry. When eunuch Xiong returns, he might exaggerate what happened here. At that time, I don't know how the emperor will misunderstand and how he will treat Wang Yi. Let him be. Pang Shao held the imperial edict in his hand. His fingertips were white from gripping it so hard. In any case, we have already come this far. Even if I don't do anything, I will still be suspected of having bad intentions. Wang Yi, for the Son of Heaven to make such a decision, he really doesn't care about the comfort of Dezhou. Right now, the most important thing is that the Titan are about to break into the capital. We should lead the army into the city gate and go straight through the capital to the north of the city to rendezvous with Marquis Dingbei. The most important thing is to discuss how to repel the Tatars, Su Weiji said with a frown. This king also knows that this is what he should do, but perhaps the emperor is waiting for me to disobey the emperor again. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this. If he disobeyed the imperial edict this time, it would be different from before. In the past, he had resisted the imperial edict to save his wife and had not harmed anyone else's interests. He had simply refused to comply with the imperial edict and return to the capital. But now, if he defied the imperial edict and directly led the army into the capital, it would look like he was trying to force the emperor to abdicate and usurp the throne. The history books would condemn him in speech and in writing. It would be inevitable that he and all of his followers would have a stain on their names. Pang Shao absolutely could not allow himself to have such a stain on his name. Fortunately, Ji Ziyu was a godlike strategist. Pang Shao was quite clear about his ability. Right now, he could still hold on for a while, enough for him to quickly march around Jiashao Valley. While Pang Shao was discussing with his strategists, the news of Your Majesty's imperial edict had gradually spread among the army. When they heard that Your Majesty had actually made them wait for so many days, but in the end, he gave the order to take a detour, everyone was very puzzled. Some of the more straightforward ones had already begun to sigh with emotion. Isn't it because he's afraid of our Wang Yi? Wang Yi brought us into the capital to kill the Tatars, but Your Majesty is so narrow-minded, guarding against us as if we were thieves. It's really chilling. Enough, this is not something we can say. Some of the more cautious ones came out to stop them and change the topic. What did Wang Yi say? Are we really going to take a detour to Jiashao Valley? If the ruler wants the subject to die, the subject has no choice but to die. What can Wang Yi do? Everyone was silent for a moment. Some people couldn't help but think that if Wang Yi was willing to lead them into the capital, it would be great. This kind of conversation was happening in every corner of the Southern Ping Army's camp. Qin Yining reclined on the wooden couch in the tent, hugging the quilt as she stared at the door in a daze. Li Qitian had given such an imperial edict. He really did not trust Pang Shao at all. If Pang Shao really wanted to take a detour to Jiashao Valley, he probably wouldn't bring her along. Rationally, Qin Yining knew that as a woman, she wouldn't be of any help to Pang Shao if she went to the front line. She might even become Pang Shao's burden and weakness. However, emotionally, she was already used to being with Pang Shao. Now that they were going to be separated again, she really didn't want to. When Pang Shao came back, he saw Ji Yun and Bing Tang quietly doing needlework at the door. Qin Yining was wrapped in a quilt and lying on her side. He thought that Qin Yining was asleep and immediately made a shushing gesture. He excused Bing Tang and Ji Yun from bowing and tiptoed to the side of the wooden bed. Qin Yining heard the footsteps and immediately looked over. Did I wake you up? Pang Shao smiled and sat down. Qin Yining shook her head. No, I wasn't asleep. I was just thinking about something. She flipped over and sat up. She casually combed her messy long hair. When do you plan to leave for Jiashao Valley? The imperial edict has already been issued. I can only leave tomorrow morning to report. Otherwise, people will misunderstand that I intend to rebel against the imperial edict. Qin Yining nodded and said worriedly, time is tight. Right now, we are bringing so many people. Food is also a problem. Can you handle it? Pang Xiao pinched her face with his large hand. Don't worry, I can handle it. The only thing I am worried about is you. Sister E, I can't bring you to the front line. If it was in the past, I would have brought you with me wherever I went. Only when you are in front of me can I feel at ease. But this time we will have to fight a bloody battle with the Totters. I am afraid I won't be able to protect you. I know. Qin Yining smiled. I am not stupid. I am 4 months pregnant now. What can I do to help if I follow you to the battlefield? On the contrary, it will be inconvenient for me to recuperate. I am also afraid that it will affect my child. Pang Xiao sighed in relief. Seeing that she was so open-minded and chose the most reasonable path without his persuasion, he really liked and admired her. But he really couldn't bear to part with Qin Yining. Sister E, where do you plan to go? Qin Yining thought for a moment and said, I want to go to Golden Port. Lord Chen there is an upright person. We have lived there for a while, and he can get along well with the people there. Moreover, it is near the sea. If there is anything, we will be able to deal with it. In addition, it is also the hub to the south. We must pass through the place to transfer the provisions. If you want to bring the troops to outflank the Taiten, the provisions will have to follow. You just need to go and let me take care of the provisions. Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining in surprise. You will take care of the provisions and military. You think I can't? Qin Yining raised her eyebrows and tilted her head to look at him. The way her watery eyes and long eyelashes fluttered really made people's hearts itch. Pang Xiao couldn't help but hug her and said with a smile, I naturally trust your ability. I am worried about your health. Originally, I wanted to let Mr. Xia stay and take care of the provisions and military for me. Since that is the case, why don't I leave this to you and let Mr. Xia stay to assist you? You can also discuss with each other. If you encounter a problem, you won't have to worry about it alone. Qin Yining said with a smile, that is naturally good. Mr. Xia is resourceful and meticulous. Thinking about it, I won't be too tired. I can find a place in Golden Port to wait for the birth. Yes. Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining. After a long time, he sighed and held her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. This time, I am afraid I can't be by your side when you give birth. I can't be by your side during the most difficult time, but I have to. Don't say that. Qin Yining pointed at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, you are going to do something serious, not go sightseeing. Don't worry, I know how to take care of myself. The next time we meet, you will have another son or daughter. Pang Xiao wanted to nod repeatedly. For a moment, the corner of his mouth rose and he couldn't help but smile. Qin Yining was amused by his silly look and comforted himself in his heart. They were only separated for a short time. When the war was over, they would naturally be able to reunite. Pang Xiao was a godly commander, so there shouldn't be any major problems. Pang Xiao turned over and laid down. He whispered to Qin Yining and analyzed the current situation. They also discussed what might happen in the future. As for Bing Tang and Ji Yun, they had already gone to prepare Qin Yining's luggage. Pang Xiao brought 10 Jinghu Wei for Qin Yining. Qin Yining also had people from the Qingtian Alliance and the silver-masked spy by his side. His safety was guaranteed. The next morning, Qin Yining changed into a stone-green cotton cloak. His long black hair was loosely tied into a bun. He stood beside the carriage with a smile and looked up at Pang Xiao. All right, you still have important things to do. The South Pacifying Army will also set off in a while. Don't settle down here. I will get in the carriage and set off now. Pang Xiao nodded and whispered, don't work too hard. If there's anything, just leave it to Mr. Xia. You have to put your own health first. Everything else is secondary. You don't have to worry about me here. This time, I am cooperating with all on. I am confident. I know. I will also do my best to prepare your provisions. Pang Xiao smiled. I know your ability, but you don't have to be too nervous. Maybe His Majesty will send someone else to take care of the grain for the sake of his reputation. Qin Yining chuckled, why don't I believe it? Seeing her like this, Pang Xiao couldn't help but laugh as well. Pang Xiao carried Qin Yining and carefully put him into the carriage. He helped her tidy her hair and smiled, it's getting late. You should set off quickly. Don't delay and stay at a hotel on the way. You should go back too. Qin Yining helped him tidy up his collar and smiled, although winning the war is important, your life is more important. You must take care of yourself. Don't worry about it every time. Don't think that you can shoulder everything by yourself. Don't sacrifice yourself to save others. Promise me, don't make me worry. Pang Xiao held her hand and said, don't worry, I promise. The two looked at each other and smiled. At this moment, they seemed to have engraved each other's appearance in their hearts. Xia Yu and Jinghu Wei walked to the side of the carriage. Pang Xiao nodded at Xia Yu. The meaning of entrusting her to him was obvious in his eyes. Xia Yu had followed Pang Xiao for a long time and naturally understood. She cupped her hands and bowed with a serious expression. Wang Yi, don't worry. Pang Xiao nodded and looked at Qin Yining, go. Take good care of yourself. We can also send more messages. Chapter 1131. It wasn't just Pang Xiao and his men who were waiting for Your Majesty's decree. The common people in the city were also waiting. As early as when Pang Xiao led his troops to set up camp outside the city, the common people in the capital seemed to have been injected with new blood. Even though they could see the injured being carried back to the city for treatment every day, and there were often corpses that needed to be buried in the outskirts of the city, everyone still felt that this battle was full of hope because Prince Zhongshuan had returned with his troops. What kind of person was Pang Xiao? Pang Xiao had made great contributions to pacifying Dian and quelling the rebellion of southern Yan. In terms of fighting, there were probably not many people in Dezhou who could compare to him. With Duke Dingguo defending the city and Prince Zhongshuan leading so many troops to support them, why would they worry that the siege of the capital couldn't be lifted? However, just as everyone was looking forward to it, Prince Zhongshuan actually left with his troops. What's going on? Do you know what's going on with Prince Zhongshuan? Why did he leave? I don't know. Prince Zhongshuan has been leading his men to wait for Your Majesty's decree for so many days. Did Your Majesty order Wang Yi to leave this time? Impossible. Right now, the war is so tense. No matter who you want to leave, you can't let Prince Zhongshuan leave. You don't know. I heard that Your Majesty was worried that Prince Zhongshuan would lead his men to rebel, so he didn't let him enter the city and ordered him to take a detour to outflank the Taiden. This is simply taking off his pants to fart. Outflank the Taiden. By the time we outflank the Taiden, all of our people will be dead. Sure. You don't want to live anymore. This kind of conversation occurred in every corner of Dezhou's capital. The common people were furious that Li Qitian did not allow Prince Zhongshuan to lead troops into the city to resist the Taiden. Helpless, the Jingji guards would arrest the common people who spoke nonsense on the streets and alleys. Even so, the rumors and slanders didn't stop. Instead, they were like a wildfire. The Taiden was right in front of them, yet Your Majesty did such a thing out of jealousy. How could they not be angry? Ji Ziyu had lost a lot of weight. His incomparably handsome face was stained with dust. His hair was casually tied up at the back of his head. Stubble had also grown on his chin. Although it didn't reduce his charm, it gave off a different kind of decadent feeling. When he heard Ma Cheng's report, his expression remained unchanged as he nodded. Ma Cheng was a bold and careful person. Although his face was flushed with anger, he didn't dare to say much. He only asked, "What do you think, Marquis?" Ji Ziyu glanced at him and said in a low voice, "It's not surprising." Ma Cheng stared blankly for a moment before sorrow welled up in his heart. As a general, even if he wasn't a famous general, he couldn't help but feel sad when he saw the two mountains in front of him fall to such a state. One was feared by your majesty, and the other was used by your majesty. As a general, no one would believe him if he told others about his sadness and powerlessness. Marquis North calming. At this moment, Gao Wenliang strode over and cupped his hands in a perfunctory manner. "I plan to lead 10,000 tiger army out of the city to launch a surprise attack on the Titans. I'm here to tell you, Marquis." Plan. Ji Ziyu raised his eyebrows, a cold light flashing in his peach blossom eyes. Gao Wenliang didn't notice. He raised his square chin and said arrogantly, "Yes, the Titan have retreated. We should strike while the iron is hot. Since Marquis doesn't dare to do it, then I'll do it. I believe that with my ability and the well-trained tiger army, we can definitely defeat the Titan." Ji Ziyu pursed his lips and said indifferently, "Prince Zhongshuan spent a lot of effort to train the tiger army. It's not for you to lead them to their deaths." "Ha!" Gao Wenliang sneered and said mockingly, "Is that so? Even so, the current commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army is still me, Gao Wenliang, personally appointed by your majesty." Ji Ziyu looked at Gao Wenliang silently. Ma Cheng had a short temper and couldn't help but sneer, "Who isn't an official appointed by your majesty? Are you the only one who's from Dezhou and none of us are?" Gao Wenliang realized that he had said something wrong and glared at him. He subconsciously puffed out his chest and said loudly, "What are you saying? Aren't you nitpicking? What I meant was that my decision was made in consideration of Dezhou. Since your majesty is willing to appoint me as the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, it means that he thinks highly of my ability. Is that so?" Ji Ziyu said in a low voice, "The current situation isn't suitable for pursuit. Moreover, the Tiger Army can't tolerate any meaningless sacrifice. I don't accept your opinion." It was the first time Ji Ziyu had addressed him so deliberately. His words reminded Gao Wenliang that although he was the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, Ji Ziyu was your majesty's actual commander-in-chief against the Titan. A while ago, when the various armies arrived, your majesty ordered everyone to listen to Ji Ziyu's command. Gao Wenliang gritted his teeth and saluted, "North placating Marquis, please consider." Before he could finish, Ji Ziyu waved his hand and interrupted him, "There's nothing to consider. Let's call a ceasefire for now." Gao Wenliang glared at Ji Ziyu and gritted his teeth. When he met Ma Cheng's mocking gaze, he immediately snorted and left in a huff. Seeing Gao Wenliang walk down the city gate tower as if he was flying, Ma Cheng said worriedly, "This person is good at currying favor. He might go back and complain to someone. If it reaches your majesty's ears, I'm afraid things will change." Ji Ziyu looked down at the city gate indifferently, "Let him do as he pleases." Ma Cheng thought about it and couldn't help but laugh. Anyway, the imperial court has put North placating Marquis in an important position. Would your majesty hand over the entire task of resisting the Titan to that idiot Gao Wenliang? Your majesty isn't stupid. The parade of 280,000 soldiers took a long time. The front had already set off, but the rear hadn't received any orders. Pang Shao urged his horse to stand by the side of the road, holding a long saber in one hand and the reins in the other. He allowed the dark clouds to kick his horse uneasily as he watched the army pass by in an orderly manner. Huzi, Tang Xiu, and the other Jinghu Wei soldiers behind Pang Shao all had dark expressions. The unhappiness in their hearts was about to turn into reality. But because Pang Xiao was present, everyone suppressed their feelings and did not show it. Huzi had followed Pang Xiao the longest and knew Pang Xiao's temper and personality. Just by looking at his back, Huzi knew that Wang Yi was not in a good mood right now. Wang Yi and Wang Fei were so loving, and Wang Fei was 4 months pregnant. They should have been able to enjoy the happiness of a family, but because of the Son of Heaven's decisions, they were forced to separate. When Wang Fei needed someone to accompany her the most, Wang Yi could not be by Wang Fei's side. Wang Yi must be very anxious. Wang Yi. Huzi urged his horse forward and said in a low voice, "Right now, we are just outside the city. The army has not even completely moved out. As long as Wang Yi gives the order, this situation will end. I believe that with our 280,000 soldiers and Wang Yi's command, it will be easy to take Jing." Pang Xiao turned back to look at Huzi and said in a low voice, "Do not mention this matter again. Right now, I am doing this to prevent the people of Dezhou from being enslaved by other tribes. This is the most important matter. As to other matters, we will discuss them after we clear out the enemies." Yes. Huzi saw that Pang Xiao had made up his mind and knew that it was useless to try to persuade him. He nodded obediently and then smiled and said, "Wang Yi, do not worry. Right now, you have hundreds of people responding to your call. No matter what decision you make, we will support it." This was clearly saying that he supported Pang Xiao in taking the throne. Pang Xiao's face was dark and he did not speak. Huzi did not speak and retreated. Pang Xiao was not in the mood to think about taking the throne. He was worried about Qin Yining. Although he had arranged enough guards and Qin Yining had people to protect and take care of him, Pang Xiao was still worried. Right now, he only wanted to end this war as soon as possible and return peace to the world. He also wanted his sister Yi to live a peaceful life and not have to wander around like a homeless person. Qin Yining left Jing and did not take a roundabout route. The group headed straight for Jingang. Bingtang said worriedly, "Wang Fei, should we hide our tracks? This servant is worried that your Majesty's people will follow us." Qin Yining smiled, "It's not important. We cannot completely live in seclusion. Even if we avoid them now, when we reach Jingang, we will still have to live under their eyes. The Emperor's people will still be able to find us. What should we do?" Bingtang frowned worriedly, "Wang Yi is not by your side. What if the Emperor makes a move against you? Of course, we have to be on guard." Qin Yining tightened the cloak on his shoulders and smiled, "When the time comes, we will naturally think of a way. Even if we hide here and there, it is useless." Bingtang and Ji Yun both nodded. Qin Yining was right. The smartest response was not to simply hide. Because if they hid, they would be found by the Emperor's people. What they had to do was to stay in the open and think of an easy way out. Wang Fei has always been so calm and intelligent. She is resourceful. Bingtang sighed, "If Wang Fei was not quick-witted and decisive in many matters, I am afraid that we would have suffered a calamity sooner or later. Since I brought all of you out, I have to be responsible for all of your lives. I will do all that I can. But I do feel that ever since I got pregnant, my brain is not enough." Qin Yining self-deprecatingly said, "Is there any way to nourish my brain?" Ji Yun and Bingtang stilled when they heard this and then giggled. Wang Fei is joking again. Of course, there is a way. Once we settle down, we will eat it. The laughter in the carriage also infected the people accompanying and protecting the carriage. Originally, everyone had been somewhat depressed when they were forced to leave Jing City. But now, they felt that as long as they followed Wang Fei, they would have a path to walk. Unknowingly, Qin Yining's influence on them as a woman was no less than Pang Zhao's influence on them. Deep in the palace, Li Qitian heard the reports of countless eunuchs. He confirmed that the South Pacifying Army outside Jing City had completely left and was heading towards Jiaxiao Valley to follow the imperial edict to outflank the Taiten. He couldn't help but sigh in relief. Fortunately, Pang Xiao did not insist on entering the city. Otherwise, wouldn't they be laughed at in the end? At least Pang Xiao was tactful. Chapter 1132. Li Qitian nodded expressionlessly, but his hands gripped the hem of his robe under the table. This Pang Zhishi really wouldn't let him live peacefully in any way. When he didn't have a son, Pang Zhishi had a twin first. It wasn't easy for the heavens to open their eyes and let Pang Zhishi lose his son, but now his wife had another. Pang Zhishi didn't have any concubines, only this one woman. He had 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, but he still only had one eldest son. He wasn't much older than Pang Zhishi, so why couldn't he do it? Order people to secretly protect the Prince Zhongshuan's consort. Li Qitian ordered in a deep voice. The spies naturally understood Li Qitian's meaning. After following the emperor for so long, they had seen a lot of things in the dark. How could they not know the emperor's fear and jealousy of the Prince Zhongshuan? Although it was said to be protection, they all understood what this protection meant. It was fine as long as they didn't lose track of the person. As you wish. The spies cupped their hands and bowed, then quickly retreated. Li Qitian rubbed between his eyebrows tiredly. Looking at the booklets on the table, he only felt annoyed. He simply stood up and walked out. Let's go to Cunning Palace. Yes, your majesty will go to Cunning Palace. Xiong Jinxue shouted and quickly followed behind Li Qitian. It was almost lunchtime, and the empress was playing with the eldest son. Come to mother. The empress had a loving smile on her face. She shook the rattle drum in her hand. The small red drum shook twice. 2 red coral beads fell on the surface of the drum with lotuses drawn on it. It caused the children in red to giggle and stumble forward. Li Qitian entered and saw this scene. When he learned that Pang Zhao's woman was pregnant, his jealousy reached its peak. Your Majesty. When the empress saw Li Qitian, she hurriedly curtsied. The wet nurse also hurried forward to support Brother Hao. The child's charmingly naive body also bowed to Li Qitian and called out in a childish voice, Daddy. Only then did Li Qitian reveal a slight smile. The empress hurriedly hugged her son. Hao Jither, you have to call Imperial Father. Come, say this son greets Imperial Father. The child blinked his big eyes and looked up at Li Qitian. He squatted down again obediently. Urchin, please greet Father Hua. The child's voice was soft and obedient. Coupled with his unclear pronunciation, Li Qitian burst into laughter. She bent down and held Hao Guo's armpits to pick him up. Get up. Thank you, Your Majesty. The empress secretly breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. Your Majesty's appearance when he entered the door scared her so much that she almost wanted to ask the wet nurse to quickly send her son away so that he would not be frightened. Fortunately, she did not do so. Qin Yining's journey to Golden Harbor was very smooth. Because she had come here more than once, she was familiar with the road. This time, she was going to Golden Harbor on the same road as the previous disaster relief. Therefore, whenever Qin Yining showed her face, the people she met were all extremely respectful and grateful to her. At this time, it was already the time when spring was warm and the flowers were blooming. Except for the men who had followed Pang Xiao to join the army, the common people in various places had started to cultivate intensively. In addition, they were rebuilding their homes. So, the scenery they encountered along the way was filled with a thriving atmosphere. The more Qin Yining walked, the more relaxed she felt. Even the matter of handling the food was more skillful. With Xiaoyu present, she often only needed to give a general idea and Xiaoyu would be able to arrange it properly. Qin Yining really did not need to work too hard. Wang Fei, Golden Harbor City is up ahead. Bing Tang lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked out the window with a smile. Everywhere she saw was green, along the way, everywhere is full of vitality. Wang Ye's disaster relief efforts were really not in vain. Qin Yining had a preserved sour plum in her mouth and a small bump on her cheek. Hearing this, her eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. That's right. We met many familiar faces along the way. Back then, we were so hungry that we were just skin and bones. Now, we are much better. If the heavens favor us and give us a stable year, everyone will recover in less than 3 years. That's right. All of this is thanks to Wang Yi. Ji Yun also smiled. They arrived at the city gates smoothly and saw a small group of people standing not far away. The person in the lead was dressed in a dark green robe with narrow sleeves and a white jade buckle around his waist. His hair was neatly tied up at the top of his head. His handsome features carried some vicissitudes and tiredness, but it did not diminish his elegance at all. It's Boss Joe. Bing Tang frowned. She's waiting here. Could it be that she knows that our team is about to arrive? Ji Yun's expression became serious and she looked inquiringly at Qin Yining. Wang Fei, do you want to see her? I keep feeling that she's up to no good. Qin Yining was a little hesitant, but he nodded and said, our standpoints are different. It's human instinct to seek benefits and avoid harm. Although she's quite calculative, she didn't really hurt us. Moreover, whether she wants to avenge her grandfather or not is her own choice. It has nothing to do with us. She's Mu Gongzi's wife, so it's better not to make things too stiff. Then you must be careful. We're now out of Wang Ye's protection, and the 4-way number is everywhere. I'm afraid that if she's up to no good, we won't be able to deal with it. Ji Yun couldn't help but stroke the soft sword wrapped around her waist, as if she was thinking about what angle she should choose to attack if Qiu Feishan wanted to harm Qin Yining. Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh at her serious appearance. No, she and Wang Yi have common interests now. She still hopes that Wang Yi will defeat Lu Heng so that the Qiu family can be completely stabilized. Even if she's scheming, it's a matter for the future. As he spoke, the carriage stopped in front of Qiu Feishan. Qin Yining lifted the curtain and met Qiu Feishan's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, Boss Qiu, why are you waiting here? Qiu Feishan saw that Qin Yining was amiable and didn't directly make her lose face like Pang Xiao, so she quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Wang Fei. Qiu Feishan cupped her hands and said with a smile, I heard that you came here, so I've been waiting here. You heard? Qin Yining raised an eyebrow and asked. Qiu Feishan smiled and said, Wang Fei is a smart person. Naturally, you know where I heard it from. Naturally, I still know the ability of the Qiu family. Qin Yining knew that Qiu Feishan was inadvertently showing the strength of the Qiu family to him, so that their cooperation would look more attractive. After all, the Qiu family also had a complicated relationship in the court. In the past, when the Lu family didn't make any mistakes, the reclusive families should act in a low-key manner according to the ancestral teachings. So the people trained by the Qiu family only appeared when the Lu family completely fell. But now, many officials in the court had inextricable ties with the Qiu family. She was indirectly telling him that now that Pang Xiao was fighting in the front line, there was a time when the Qiu family was needed. Qiu Feishan raised the corner of her lips. It's refreshing to talk with a smart person like Wang Fei. There's no need to waste time explaining. Wang Fei suddenly came here, so you must have not bought a house or a field. I have prepared a house with 2 courtyards. The location is excellent. It's not remote, and it's not too noisy. It's most suitable for Wang Fei's elegant temperament. I wonder if Wang Fei is willing to go. Qin Yining smiled and said, to be honest, I have ordered people to prepare a house first, but I still thank Boss Chiu for her kindness. Chiu Feishan was a little disappointed. It seems that Wang Fei is the same as Wang Yi, still angry. No, Boss Chiu misunderstood. It's just that I bought a house, so there's no need for Boss Chiu to spend money. As for Wang Yi, he's not angry. The person who's really angry is Mu Gongzi. After all, we're all outsiders. Everyone has their own standpoints. You didn't directly harm me and Wang Yi, so why should we be angry? Although this was the truth, for Chiu Feishan, it was the most painful. She wanted to share a box with Pang Xiao, but whether Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were angry or not, she didn't care at all. She always cared about Mu Jinghu. If she knew that Mu Jinghu would have such a big reaction, she would have thought of a more careful way to not let him find out. Chiu Feishan sighed, as a Wang Fei, I feel more and more uneasy. Qin Yining looked around, then smiled and said, this is not the place to talk. If Boss Chiu doesn't mind, you can get on the carriage and come with me to see the new house. Chiu Feishan was surprised when she heard this. She didn't expect Qin Yining to take the initiative to invite her, so she hurried forward. Bing Tang and Ji Yun looked at each other, then looked at Qin Yining questioningly. After all, the space in the carriage was limited, and the master wanted to talk business. If they didn't leave, it would be unreasonable. But they didn't want to leave Qin Yining's safety to Chiu Feishan. Bing Tang got off the carriage. Ji Yun ignored Qin Yining's signal and refused to get off. She just tried to sit in front of the door, giving her seat to Chiu Feishan, who just got on the carriage. Chiu Feishan saw that Qin Yining's maid refused to leave, so she smiled and didn't care. But when she saw Qin Yining's slightly bulging belly, she couldn't help but look at her in surprise. Wang Fei is pregnant again. Qin Yining was wearing a pea-green robe. This robe was made after she gave birth to Zhao Gu and Han Gu. At that time, she was more plump. Now that she wore it, the rest of her body was much looser. Only the belly was just right. She sat in the carriage all day and liked to wear such loose and soft material. Her hair was simply tied up with a ribbon, looking very casual. So her pregnancy was very obvious at this time. Yes, it's been more than 4 months. If not, I would have followed Wang Yi to the battlefield. But Wang Yi didn't allow it. He insisted that I come to Jingang to nurture the baby. Chiu Feishan couldn't help but sigh with envy. Wang Fei is really lucky. She originally had no feelings for children, but now that she had Yan Gu, although she still had to run Si Tong's shop, she had already divided her attention to the children. She also wanted to have a few more children, but unfortunately, Mu Jinghu was determined to not accept her anymore. Qin Yining saw Chiu Feishan's sad expression and said softly, Boss Chiu, I have something to say. It's from the perspective of a friend, and also from the perspective of a woman. I don't know if you're willing to listen to me. Chiu Feishan nodded. Wang Fei, please speak. I'm all ears. Qin Yining smiled and said, Boss Chiu is a smart woman. You're very capable. Many men can't compare to you. You're in the business world and have a superior status. You've also developed a lot of pride and principles. These are all understandable. But Boss Chiu seems to have misjudged the human heart. Especially a man who is equally outstanding and full of pride. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.